Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Jennifer Parsons with the Department of Ecology in Washington State. I'm an aquatic plant specialist, and I'm also a co-chair of this cooperative weed management area for the Columbia Basin, and our focus is, of course, on flowering rush so far. And the other co-chair is going to introduce herself now.
Good morning, I'm Jennifer Andrews, just another Jennifer on this. It's not confusing at all. Jennifer Andrews, I'm with Washington State University Extension, and I'm the biocontrol specialist for the state. And we would like to begin this meeting by acknowledging the indigenous people of this region and recognize that we are sitting on ancestral and unceded territory.
Okay, great, thank you. So I'm going to be doing the intro part, and I just wanted to cover a little bit of the history of the cooperative weed management area in case some of you are new to the group. So it all started back in 2017 when the Washington Invasive Species Council got a grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Federation as part of their Pulling Together initiative. I think it was for about $65,000, and part of the grant deliverables, one of the things was we were going to have a flowering rush summit, and then as part of that summit come up with a management plan or a flowering rush plan for the whole Columbia Basin. And so we did have that summit back in 2018 in February, and that was in Spokane. It was really well attended, so we were really pleased with that. And then the plan, there was committees formed out of that summit to work on the plan, and that plan was finalized in 2019, last year. And we had our final in-person meeting of our most recent in-person meeting of our cooperative weed management area as part of the Innovations in Invasive Species Conference, which was last December in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. A lot of people were able to attend that, so that was a really good meeting. The grant ended in December, and so in the spring of 2020, last year, a group of us on this that are still on the steering committee met to try and decide and figure out how we could move forward. And we cobbled together a little bit of money to keep the Invasive Species Action Network, which had been the consultant we had hired to help us write the plan, put everything together, keep us on track, and organize the cats, kind of. And so we managed to keep them on with a little bit of money, which was donated by the Washington Invasive Species Council, again, Justin Bush, and the Washington Department of Agriculture through Greg Hobrick, and the Missoula County Weed District through Bryce Christians. So I'd really like to thank those people for stepping up to the plate and donating some money to keep LEA and the Invasive Species Action Network helping us out, because that's really been instrumental to keeping us organized. So that's kind of the background and history. The management plan has sections on priority areas for each region, and I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that in a little bit, but if you haven't looked at the plan recently, in addition to having a lot of great information on flowering rush itself and its distribution in the basin, it does identify goals for each region. So you might want to look at those if you haven't looked at them recently. There is also a section in the plan for goals for the CWMA, and those actions included things like survey and monitoring protocol development, data sharing, which I'm going to be talking about our mapping program here in a minute. We identified some research priorities and also identified the need to support the biocontrol development research. And our long-term goals included creation of an economic impact assessment specific to flowering rush in the Columbia Basin. That I think would be a really great piece of data to have, so we could further justify spending money on controlling this plant if we could illustrate what an impact it's going to have. And also we thought it would be good to help with the biocontrol implementation strategy once biocontrols are available. So as the mapping portion. If you could switch to the mapping slide, Jen. And this is a screen capture of it. You can get to this map either on the Columbia Basin Cooperative Weed Management Area website, which you can just Google that name and get to the website, or I think there was a link to it in the previous slide, or there's a shortcut to it down at the bottom of this slide. And it's a really useful tool. There's a little arrow at the bottom of the live map that you can click on, and it will bring up a menu where you can filter out, like if you just want to see the actual present rather than the negative survey, just the positive surveys, you can filter out for that. You can filter out for date. You can filter out for only showing the points that are visible when you zoom in if you want to download data from the map. So it's really useful, but it's only as useful as the data we feed into it. So I just want to remind everyone to send in your data if you have any new points for this year. You can send them to me. My contact information will be up a few times throughout the morning. Or you can send it to Brant Carman at the Washington State Department of Agriculture if you have his contact information. And so that's all I wanted to say about the map. As far as the next item I wanted to talk about was the steering committee. Thanks, Jen. And these are the members of the steering committees, in case any of you have forgotten that you're on the steering committee. And we would like to have a meeting. We invite other people to join us. We're going to have a steering committee meeting on December 14th at 11 a.m. So information will be going out about that to the wider group. We'd like to invite any new people who would like to join the steering committee to join us. We may be losing a few people because I know, at least it's especially for Oregon, they've lost the ability to help with the group because of funding shortfalls due to the pandemic. We'd also like to try and continue to support Leah in the coordinator role of the group, because that's really helpful to have somebody kind of keeping us on tabs and keeping our website up to date and things like that. We may find ourselves in some kind of role with the WRDA funding, which is going to be talked about in a later presentation this morning. Talk a little bit more about future directions of the CWMA if we want to try and apply for grant funding to do like that economic assessment or anything like that. So anyway, come and join us at the steering committee meeting that we're going to have on December 14th if you have the ability and the interest. And with that, we have a really full agenda this morning. This is just overview of it. And so I think without further ado, I will turn it over to Leah to cover a few of the housekeeping items, and we'll jump right in.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jen. Both Jens. Yes, hi, I am Leah Elwell. Don't be confused by the little tab at the bottom of the screen there that says I'm Mason, who also works with Invasive Species Action Network. But thanks for joining us today. I just wanted to say a few things on housekeeping, and then we will begin our agenda here. So as an attendee, the majority of you that have joined us, you are only participating on the webinar in listen-only mode. But if you do have a question for one of our presenters, I would encourage you to put that either in the question or the chat box, whichever is visible to you. Make sure you list who the question is directed at, and we will do as best we can to address all those questions. If we don't get to yours, please feel to reach out to me and I can get you in direct contact with the speaker if we need some clarification. And then finally, at the end of this webinar, I will have a recording of this and we'll share it via the listserv, and you'll be able to find it on the CWMA's website as well. So without further ado, I would like to jump into our first section where we will have groups or the states and provinces give us individual updates from their geographic region. And we're going to start with Jeremy Varley, who is with the Idaho Department of Agriculture. And I will just work on changing the baton here to Jeremy. And Jeremy, you should be able to go ahead and share your screen.
Oh, yes.
I can see you. Wonderful, I can see your screen.
There we go. Everybody see my screen okay?
Yep.
All right.
Go ahead.
Perfect. All right, so what follows, I'm just going to give a short, they asked us to give just about a 10-minute or less update for our state and what we've been doing for flowering rush in Idaho and what's been happening during 2020. So I'll go ahead and just start right off really quick. You know, when it comes down to flowering rush, I just wanted to just give a quick snapshot of kind of what took place, and those are, you know, mainly we did a lot of survey this year, and even though we were met with as I'm sure everybody was, with the challenges due to the pandemic and what's been occurring there. So we had such things as, you know, hiring freezes where we weren't able to hire seasonal employees for this season. So that workload fell to our full-time staff and all the other tasks that we had to complete without our seasonals this year. But we were up to the challenge. So we did do a lot of surveys. We did have some treatments occur. And then I'll just kind of close it up and wrap it up with just kind of the current view of the distribution of flowering rush in Idaho. As we are still wrapping up our season, we still have some surveys occurring currently. Some of those are drawdown due to the dewatering of some reservoirs. We're getting in there and being able to get a much better picture of where that flowering rush is in some of those situations. So just a quick 5-year snapshot of kind of what's been happening in Idaho broadly over all of our aquatic plants is we've really been ramping up our aquatic surveys. You can see last year was in 2019 was a giant peak year with we were able to hire a lot of seasonal employees to help that workload of getting to all of our water bodies to do surveys. And then this year we did trend downward because of that lack of ability to hire them. But we still are trending upward in the amount of surveys that we're completing. So for that, approximately 1,062 survey points were taken for flowering rush this year in several water bodies in our population areas of both the northern and in that southeastern population. And the main thing that we were targeting this year is, rather than trying to broaden and see where all of the infestations possibly could be, it was more to respond to reports if we had someone report flowering rush in a new area where we weren't aware of it, as well as to try and find some leading edge populations, especially in that population area in the southeast, where we're trying to see how far it's gotten and if it hasn't started to expand its way down the Snake River. So with that, we didn't really find much new in the way of expansion down further down the Salmon or down the Snake River. We did find about 51 positive survey locations on that premise of those 1,000, and then just some new population areas up in the north. Most surprising of which was down in the very southern end of Lake Panda Ray near the naval base down there. So we did find some in there, and we're working with the Navy base to do some follow-up surveys during the drawdown phase to possibly work with them to do a handful this winter before the ground freezes solid. But that's ongoing work that is continuing as we foster that relationship with the Navy there. And then down in the southeast, we did do some handfuls and treatments that I'll talk about here. So for the treatment side of things that we did with our flowering rush this year, we had 3 different treatment kind of schedules occurring. We did have a cooperative weed management area up in northern Idaho, the Selkirk CWMA, that applied for and received $20,000 for a landowner cost share type program, where the landowners were able to obtain either herbicide or a contract service to treat the flowering rush during the drawdown phase of Lake Panda Ray prior to spring water up. So that way they're able to go in there and do basically a on-the-ground treatment, not an in-water treatment, and utilize those services and get some done. And they have spent that. I have not received a final report on that to figure out just how many acres they have treated this year, because that report is due the end of December, when the CWMAs are turn in their annual reports, and they give that full reporting and accounting of their projects that they carried out through the season. So I am looking forward to that, because that was according from what I've heard during my term reports from them, it has been a very successful project, and they were able to utilize all of that funding this year. Next, we were able to award a statewide contract for diving services for hand removal. It was awarded Aquatic Weed Solutions out of Northern Idaho. And they did perform some flowering rush removal for us on the Blackfoot Reservoir this year. And we're able to, I'll talk just briefly here just a little bit more about that. But it was the first time that work has been conducted on the Blackfoot Reservoir. ISDA staff, our full-time staff, we also did some removal efforts on the Blackfoot River and Snake River and American Falls Reservoir. And those are just opportunistic hand pullings as we're doing our surveys, because most of those are occurring in those low population areas where it hasn't expanded fully yet. And so it allows us to kind of go in there and hand remove those smaller populations and try and keep them from moving further downstream. So shift gears here and go to the Blackfoot Reservoir. Now, this reservoir is an interesting one to work in because as you can see on this picture on the lower left, you can see the flowering rush is very big. It does quite well in this reservoir. However, the drawdown of this is a continuous drawdown after spring runoff because it is used solely for the purpose of irrigation downstream Fort Hall Indian Reservation. And so the drawdown is pretty significant from after time of spring runoff. So you'll have flowering rush that's both in the water and all the way up to 100 yards away from water's edge, depending on the time of the season that we're there. So in these little pink areas that you can see highlighted in the map, this is the areas that were assigned to the divers or the areas of highest population density to start getting them in there and working on those. Now with these areas, it was kind of difficult for them because they were able to take care of everything that was in the water at the time of them getting there in August, late August. But there was a lot that was still higher up in the well out of the water and would have been very difficult because the soil there is has a lot of clay in it, so it makes that very difficult to do any hand pulling out of the soil up there. So we are planning to go back in early this next spring. As once water level after the event of the spring runoff occurs, and the flowering rush is germinating, so we can get in there and find that and get a little bit better removed, a little better control. But they were able to do a fair amount of the pulling in some of these the larger area in the very south east corner of that map where there's that big pink blotch. That's the area where they did most of their work this year, and then as well as in the very northwest corner there's those two big areas up there where they are around the dam and that lead off to the Blackfoot River, where they're able to work on those. And there's a public boat ramp up there that we're concerned with, just because a lot of people come and go to come in here and fish and hunt. So current distribution. This is kind of a quick snapshot with our data for this year, kind of what it's looking like. We do have a new population area that we were made aware of in Idaho County. That the Idaho County Weed Department is taking care of. It was in a small ornamental pond. So they went in there and they've been working with that landowner there to remove that. And then just again in our northern and southeastern population areas that we're aware of, and we're working to expand that the survey in those areas. And with those treatments that we're planning for next year, we are planning for Blackfoot Reservoir to take some more attention with the divers this next season. It's been a very interesting dynamic to work in the Blackfoot due to the water being utilized by the tribe, the water being a state resource in its current capacity in the reservoir, and then the tribe does own that water right. So it's been a very dynamic situation to learn what controls and control methods we can utilize in that, and working with the Fort Hall Indian Reservation and the tribe there to foster that relationship and start working on better controls for that reservoir to stop the spread of that further downstream. And then with that, I'm all set for any questions.
Oh, great. I was going to say you have about 45 seconds, so perfect.
Excellent.
Thanks, Jeremy. I don't see any questions for you in our chat. Be sure if you have questions as we go through this to put things in that chat or question area. But perfect timing, Jeremy. Thank you so much for sharing.
I tried to make sure it was 10 minutes.
Everybody appreciates that. That's awesome. I know it feels like we're on a roller coaster, but I like being able to get in as many voices as possible. So thank you so much, Jeremy. So now we're going to be switching over to Craig McLean with Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And you should be able to go ahead, Craig.
All right. I assume you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you great. Go ahead. Perfect.
And you can see my screen?
Uh-huh.
Great. All right. So I just want to highlight some of the efforts that have happened in Montana within the Columbia River Basin on some of our survey efforts targeting flowering rush. So we typically have three teams across the state that do all taxa AIS sampling. So they're doing plants and animals while they're out. So we have one crew that's based out of Kalispell, and they cover all of our sampling west of the divide. And those two staff sampled, hold on a second, this is an old map, 1 second. Got a different version here somewhere. It's like I made changes to this, but okay. Let's try this again here. Okay, so here you can see a map of all the sampling locations that we do all plant taxa, all animal taxa surveys. So there was 330 sites that we covered over 112 different waters. So I mean, we really hit every major water within the basin. The problem is we're only hitting high-risk sites. So this would be like a boat ramp, a recreation area. So we're not really doing whole lake surveys on these waters, which would be great, but obviously we don't have time to do all of those. But in all of those locations, we didn't find any new flowering rush locations other than the water bodies that we already know have it. So we did have them spend some time as we could allocate to them to do some comprehensive shoreline surveys. So this is up in the Kalispell area. So Flathead Lake is on the right, bottom right of that map. So they did some surveys in some of the surrounding major lakes that are used more frequently. And during this time, they were doing visual surveys, and this is in August, just so during peak growth and hopefully flowering, so that they can see these plants a little bit easier. And so they completed 7 lakes, so they do a whole lake circumnavigation, looking for plants, and they have a rake as they needed to inspect plants that are submerged. So they did those lakes as well as portions of Flathead Lake, and in these lakes we didn't find any flowering rush, which is great. So if you look at the map here, so this is the sections of Flathead Lake that they sampled. So the yellow sections are sections they just weren't able to get to due to time or weather, since wind is an enemy sometimes on Flathead Lake. So again, they worked down the shorelines of Flathead Lake and noted any patches that they find, and then record size of patch and kind of the number of plants, density information along with it. So one interesting thing is the points that they found on the east side of the lake are typically associated with those private coves or marinas along the lake shore, whereas the western side were more small discrete patches scattered along the shoreline. So that it'll be interesting to see once we get back and finish the rest of the lake to see if that's kind of holding true as well. So there's still a lot of area on Flathead Lake that we need to get to. That north end's fairly shallow, so that will be a much more difficult section to survey. just because it's a big, shallow, flat bed out there that we can spend lots of time on. So that kind of, here's a distribution, current distribution of Montana flowering rush. So it's maintained pretty much as is. The one caveat is I suspect we have some of it in the valley, the Flathead Valley, and through the irrigation systems. And I've heard reports that there is, and I haven't been able to find good distribution data of any of that. So that's kind of the big unknown in the valley. So still currently in the same waters from Flathead River down all the way down to the Idaho border. So for next season, we have plans to get out and finish Flathead Lake, try to get those yellow areas covered. We have some more waters right around the Kalispell area, especially, that we would like to get to that are adjacent to the Flathead River and close to Flathead Lake. Try to finish those up, and then also I'm trying to get some plans put in place to do some sampling along those irrigation ditches throughout the valley. This would be a big undertaking, so I'm going to try to see if I can rope in some irrigation district staff or people who might be interested in helping out. So that's kind of a work in progress, and we'll see how much of it we can get done this next year. And so that's what I got, and I'll answer any questions if there's any.
Excellent, thank you, Craig. I do not see any questions or chat for Montana, but thank you so much for sharing. I guess we'll just keep rolling along here, and I encourage you to stick around so we can, we do have a few minutes at the end if there's any discussion too needed. So let's see, now we are going to move to Washington to Jen Parsons with Washington Department of Ecology.
Okay. So can you, whoops.
Yep.
Can you see it?
I can see your screen, yep.
Great. So I'm just going to go over Washington's updates for this year. And while I'm the one talking, I just want to acknowledge that this is definitely a team effort. There are a lot of people involved with flowering rush in the state. And so I have them listed here. Sorry if I forgot anyone, but you can see it's quite a number of groups that are working on it. So first, just kind of the broad overview of the state. This purple line is the edge of the Columbia Basin. And so while we have a couple of patches of flowering rush on the west side of the Cascades, I'm not going to be talking about those this morning. I'm going to focus here on these other ones that are in the basin, starting with the Yakima River, which flows into the Columbia River. Lake Intiat is a reservoir along the main stem of the Columbia just north of the town of Wenatchee, which is here. Lake Roosevelt is also on the Columbia River, a reservoir. The Spokane River is a separate population coming down from a point that I think we found. I'm going to be talking about that in a minute. And then the Panda Ray River is a population coming down from Montana and Idaho populations. So it seems like we have 4 distinct populations. There's this one in the Panda Ray, the one in the Spokane. This Lake Intiat population is genetically distinct from the rest, and then the Yakima River population. So starting at the bottom in the Yakima River, we've been treating the emergent plants along the Yakima since 2015. It's a group that consists of myself and Department of Fish and Wildlife biologists, and then Benton County Noxious Weed Control Board. And we go out every year and use airboats to treat those sections of the river that we can reach with an airboat. And so we're seeing good declines up here at the upper end near Prosser but there's a stretch just downstream of Prosser that we can't get to with the airboats, and so that has been left untreated. And so downstream of there, we think we're getting propagules just feeding this population downstream. So we're just barely holding our own in those downstream areas, even though we're treating annually. And we are using glyphosate as the treatment because imazapyr, while more effective, is not usable in areas where there's irrigation. So as far as I know, the main stem of the Columbia in this area didn't receive treatment in the main Columbia, or it did receive treatment, which is going to be talked about in a minute, but there wasn't a lot of additional survey work, although I did meet up with Dave McDermott and his crew from the Corps of Engineers who did some hand pulling on the lower parts down near McNary Dam. Just from the boat. These populations are not well established yet. It's just pioneering. And so Dave has found that if you do hand pulling this way earlier in the year, like in August, don't wait too late because the rhizomes get more brittle the later in the year it becomes. Then you can, it seems like we're pulling up the whole entire plant. It doesn't look like the rhizomes are breaking. Obviously, we might be breaking off some of the buds, but we're hoping this is better than doing nothing, which is the alternative. So we did do some of that in the lower parts of the reservoir, especially just above McNary Dam. So I just wanted to include this picture to show some of the challenges along the Yakima River. We are treating from an airboat with hoses most of the time, but we do have to get out with a backpack sprayer. This is Conrad Cower from Benton County spraying plants. You can see there's a couple of flowers here, but if it wasn't flowering, it would be impossible to find amongst all these sedges, and there's a lot of reed canary grass. This also illustrates that there's a giant patch of probably invasive Phragmites right behind him. So invasive species are a real challenge throughout that river. So moving on to Lake Iniat, which is again that main stem reservoir on the Columbia just north of Wenatchee that's genetically distinct. We originally found plants up here near the town or near the Arundo boat launch, and then had found these patches down here earlier. And this year, the PUD did one of their semi-annual whole reservoir surveys, the Chelan PUD did, and they found a patch on the Chelan County side, which was the first time it had been found over here. And every year since finding these patches, we have done hand pulling, and that with scuba divers, and that again happened this year. With the Spokane River, this population is throughout the Spokane River reservoirs. So that's Lake Spokane and 9 Mile Reservoir, which are both managed by Avista Utilities, which is the utility corporation in Spokane. And then downstream also in Little Falls Reservoir, which is the reservoir just upstream from Lake Roosevelt. And this population, we hadn't found the upper end of it. Last year, we had surveyed a reservoir along the Spokane River upstream of the city of Spokane and didn't see it there. So we figured it must be somewhere between that reservoir and 9 Mile Reservoir. So this year, Rob Stevenson from Spokane from Avista went out and just drove along Hangman Creek, one of the major tributaries, and did find flowering rush at some road crossings there. And so the county weed control board, the Spokane County Noxious Weed District, went out and did some additional surveys, and they found the source of the population appears to be Rock Creek, which is a tributary to Hangman Creek. And we haven't quite found the definitive upstream end, but we think it's below the little town of Rockford, so probably just a couple miles upstream of where this red line is. Unfortunately, this adds at least 30 miles of creek to the known population and another 10 miles of the Spokane River downstream of Hangman Creek. And so there's about 100 miles total of river in the Spokane River that has flowering rush now. So that's going to be a big challenge to try and control that much of an area. We hope to get together with these groups and formulate a plan this winter. I kind of skipped over the Lake Roosevelt population because we're going to be discussing that in a later presentation. So just moving on to the last one I wanted to talk about is the Panda Ray River. And Sharon Sorby, the noxious weed coordinator for Panda Ray County, didn't report any big new finds this year, although she did mention that I should mention there's, like you can see, there's scattered populations throughout the river, and they have been doing a lot of diver hand pulling for a number of years. And one of the areas that has had a big population that they've been controlling with divers every year seems to be declining. So she was encouraged about that. And the Kalispel tribe has also been controlling the flowering rush on their sections along their reservoir or along their reservation. So anyway, with that, I think that's the end, all I was going to mention for Washington. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them now, or you can always contact me at at either my phone number or email address that's listed there. Are there any questions, Leah?
No, there are no questions in the
All right.
chat. Oh, wait, maybe one of them may have just shown up. Hold on. Okay, I assume, Becky, this is to Jen, but Becky Brown asked, is the flowering rush being controlled at the Canada-US border?
Oh, up in the Panda Ray River, I am assuming. Yes, the Spokane City Light manages that reservoir, boundary reservoir, and they've been doing control work up there.
Okay, great. Yep, that answered Becky's question. Okay, super. And I see no more questions. So thank you very much, Jen. We will move now to Oregon, and Tim Butler, excuse me, with the Oregon Department of Ag. Will be
good. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, and I was trying to share my webcam, but that doesn't seem to be working. So you may just have to listen to me.
Okay.
So at any rate, again, Tim Butler, manager of the Oregon Department of Agriculture Noxious Weed Control Program. And so I don't have a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation. I guess the big news out of Oregon, as I think most of you know, 2020 has been a difficult year with COVID, et cetera. So our budgets consequently were mainly lottery funded. And so lottery revenues took a heavy hit in Oregon. And so consequently, our budget, our state funding for our program was cut for the last year of the biennium in 2020 by 80+%. So we haven't been able to do and engage in a lot of work that we normally would. You know, a lot of you know Mark Porter in our program that's done a lot of work on the Columbia with the Army Corps and et cetera on flowering rush. We weren't able to do anything this year other than some of our grants, a grant that we have with the Center for Lakes and Reservoirs. Rich Miller was able to continue to do some survey on the Columbia this year on the Oregon side, and covered areas, the McNary wildlife ponds just below McNary Dam, Lake Umatilla from McNary Dam towards Aragon, Lake Umatilla downstream from Boardman, and then Bonneville Pool and Cascade Locks and Hood River areas, and then Columbia River near Rooster Rock. So the good news there is that he didn't detect any new flowering rush sites. So that's encouraging. And so that's probably the main piece of work that we were able to be a part of in Oregon on the Columbia this year as far as flowering rush. Is I think a lot of you know that we do have one outlier site down in Klamath County that was in association with koi ponds down south. It's down on the California border. That was detected a couple of years ago. We did follow up on that. The ponds have been drained, and from previous treatments, the plant numbers were down, and there were some smaller plants that were treated this year. So we're continuing to monitor that and treat it to keep that in check. But at any rate, that's about. Again, I apologize that I don't have more detailed information at this point. I think that we're hoping to get our budget back on track for 2021. We have the legislative session is coming up starting in January, and we work on a biennial budget in Oregon. So, you know, I think that at some point, if I really appreciate all the good work that's being done in the previous presentations, and certainly in Oregon, you know, we had been very actively involved, and unfortunately this year we had to step back. The weed program staff and myself, I am also managing now our hemp program, of all things. I never thought that I would say that, but that is another funded program, and so that's why we were moved into that, as well as all of our noxious weed staff in the state are doing hemp inspections and providing technical support in the hemp program. And then also where we have federally funded noxious weed projects, they're working on those as well. So they're stretched pretty thin. It's been quite a balancing act for all of us to kind of work through that this year. So, you know, we're hoping for better times here moving forward into 2021. And I may be, you know, soliciting some or asking for some letters of support from some of you to try to help our policymakers understand the importance of having an active noxious weed program in the state. And I think that would make a big difference to have that support. So I think that's all I have. I didn't, you know, I wish I would have gotten an update from Army Corps on what is going on in the McNary Pool. So we'll by, I think, the December 14th meeting, we'll hopefully have a little more details on some of that. But I guess that's all I have at this point. Maybe this will get us back on track as far as time. And again, I appreciate all the efforts that are going on in the region with flowering rush, and wish we were able to be more engaged. So with that, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Thanks, Tim, for sharing. I appreciate you being honest, and yes, it's a really difficult time, and I hope that Oregon is able to see improvements within the upcoming legislative session. It's definitely a tough time, so we'll maybe make note of that for the steering committee to have a discussion on that too in December. So okay. I do not see any questions or Pat directed at you at this time.
Great.
But thank you so much for joining us on the webinar here and sharing.
Thank you, Leah. Yeah. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, so next we are going to go to Alberta and hear from Nicole Kimmel.
Hello.
Good morning, Nicole. I can see you and hear you just great.
Okay, I'm just gonna show my screen.
Perfect.
Sorry, what screen are you seeing again?
I can see your PowerPoint. You just need to put it in the presentation.
Great. Okay.
There you go. Looks
There,
good.
perfect. Okay. I just wanted to shift a little bit broader focus and give you the lay of the land up in Canada and particularly Alberta. We didn't start seeing flowering rush or taking particular interest into flowering rush until just in the mid 2010s. So we're a little bit behind the game. This is my first look at flowering rush, just a few clumps in a lake in the summer of 2012, and this was before we had an aquatic invasive species program. So there wasn't a lot of traction to get somebody out there and actually actively responding to it. We piloted some aquatic invasive species programming in 2013, and that's when we got traction. I didn't actually see the lake, the full extent in the lake until 2014. The same lake on the other side was quite heavily infested with flowering rush. So I've been trying to engage folks on flowering rush front for quite some time. Every year since 2014, I've been actively involved in showing people the scariness of flowering rush. Some specific challenges that we face up in Alberta is flowering rush grows weeks ahead of other vegetation. So this is flowering rush in the end of April, and we can get snow and frost all the way up until the middle of May. So nothing usually starts growing into these early months, but flowering rush has no fear and does that quickly. We often have ice come off lakes quite violently. So usually the winds pick up as well and it ice heaves. So this is flowering rush being scraped by ice when the ice comes off water bodies. I have no options, and it's very tricky to see the submerged flowering rush. So there's no chemical registrations up for the submergent plants up in Canada. So those are particular challenges that we face. As for locations, I have it in every type of water body there's out there. We have it in ornamental ponds. I have it in golf course water hazards. I have it in stormwater management ponds in the back of residential areas. I have it in creeks, rivers. All the clumps there in that river are all flowering rush. And I have it in irrigation canals lining the sides, and then in some substantial locations in some lakes. So it's tricky to tackle all these different nuanced water bodies with all their particular limitations. We haven't not tried anything. Sometimes we're repeating what other folks have found to not work. When we first found flowering rush, we thought, well, let's stop the seed production. So we're out there clipping the flower heads, but have since found that whatever it needs to make seed production, it probably isn't getting in Alberta. So seed production is the least of our worry. We have folks cutting by hand entire swaths of flowering rush, just trying to keep their beach accessible. And this is a tremendous effort by volunteers, not by us as the government. We are digging by hand in small isolated populations when we find small populations that we think we can dig our way out of. We are still doing that. We did some barriers, both rubber matting and geotech fabric. This hasn't proved effective either. We tried steaming. There's no particular approvals that you need to put steam in water, so this one was an easy one to try. It didn't work. We didn't get the temperatures we were hoping for. And we have tried mechanical dredging, but this was mostly done for silt removal in irrigation canals, and they really missed the edges where the riprap was and rush was likely to reside, so it has proved basically not effective either. We have mechanical harvesters out on a few of our lakes trying to keep flowering rush at bay, but we know that this is not going to be a control solution. This is just keeping access. We have tried diver-assisted suction harvesting, but again, our lakes are not highly visible once you get in there with a diver, so we have found that this is likely not the route either. And then we only have one herbicide registered in Alberta, and that's dicot. And we have been leveraging imazapyr through emergency use registrations with the federal government. So some efforts in Alberta. Lake Isle is by far the worst population of flowering rush. The solid red lines are very thick. and then the dots are a little bit more sporadic. So I've been working to try and get a herbicide program on this lake for years. The public and community have, been engaged, but we've met some barriers on agreement with the First Nation that also has some ownership over this lake. So we will continue that. I'm hoping to at least spray half this lake in 2021 if the political will remains. And then we're continuing to dig when we get those isolated pop-ups or reports that we can maybe tackle by digging. We are keeping on those and digging where we can. But yeah, COVID-19 sort of hindered some of our efforts. We lost some political will. Budgets was a little bit of an unknown. Staffing was a bit of an unknown until late in the season. So we've had those issues much like other jurisdictions, but we're still trying to stay on top as much as we can, but we do have some serious restrictions in herbicides for being available in Canada. That's it. Any questions?
I'm not sure if Leah is.
Oh, there. I'm sorry. There was a little mute issue, I guess. Okay, so sorry, Nicole, you do have one question.
Okay.
And it's from Virgil Dupuis. He's asking, what is the primary genotype of flowering rush that you deal with?
So we have two types. We only have one off type. I think we've worked with John Gaskin to get genotype, and I think he's covering that update, and you'll see the genotypes. So I think most of ours are covered. They're all the same except for one weird one that has popped up.
Okay, I believe also this would be a question for you, Nicole. Rob Bouchier is asking, how much of a problem are the irrigation canals in the south?
Yeah, so it's pretty extensively established in the Bow River, Saskatchewan River, and heading off into Saskatchewan. So any of the canals that are branching off from there, we haven't been able to survey, but we assume that there's a good chance that they're probably moving into those offshoots of canals off those rivers.
Okay. I have a general a comment for you, Nicole, of keep up the good work from folks in Saskatchewan. So
I'm their first line of defense. I'm trying to keep it from going there, but it's still trickling through.
Right. I have a couple of general questions, and I'm not sure. Maybe we'll save those till after Becky speaks here from BC, and then Tim, are you still here? I did have a question that came in after Nicole started. So I will pose the question, Tim, and if you want to unmute yourself. So Michelle Delpine is asking, is the furthest downstream Columbia River patch still just below John Day Dam? And I suppose others in the know may be able to answer that as well if Tim is not here. Yeah, it looks like Tim has left. Does Jen Parsons, do you know the answer to that question?
As far as I know, it's yes. We don't know of it downstream of there yet.
Okay. All right. I think I have captured all the questions. So yes, I'm sorry, Michelle, for that. There was a little bit of a delay there, I think, in getting your questions seen. So thanks for your patience. Okay, so I have two general questions, but I'm going to hold those until after Becky is going to speak from BC. And let's see here, Becky, I will make you presenter.
Are you seeing my screen? Oh, okay. All right.
I can see your screen and I can hear you. If you would like to use your webcam, that's great. Otherwise, that's fine. But your screen looks great.
You got me. Okay.
Yep. Thanks, Becky.
All right. So there we are. All right. So flowering rush in British Columbia. So I'm still just kind of absorbing everything that Nicole had to say here. I'm going to be working on that for a while. Here's what I'm going to be covering off today. For BC, we're very fortunate in BC in that we only have 4 confirmed impacted areas. So the status of flowering rush in British Columbia, it's a regulated noxious weed under the weed control regulation. The overall provincial objective is eradication province-wide. It's managed through the BC Invasive Plant Early Detection Rapid Response Program, which is nested within our provincial government invasive plant program. And so I coordinate that one province-wide. And flowering rush is one of the candidates for eradication. In 2014, we developed a provincial containment strategy for flowering rush. Since that time, I guess at that time we thought there were just 2 impacted sites or areas, and now we know there are 4. So it's a bit out of date. Anyhow, so here's a visual of what we've got in BC, and as you can see in the bottom southeast corner of British Columbia, there's the Columbia Basin area, and we only have 1 flowering rush site within the actual basin. And as you'll see, that's in a monitoring phase now. We think we've actually eradicated it. It is our smallest site by far. So I'll be going through each of these. Oh, come on. Okay, I'll be going through each of these. All right, so first of all, for surveillance and extension, we've been doing targeted aquatic plant surveys province-wide since 2012. And of those surveys, no new sites of flowering rush have popped up, which is fantastic. So the sites that we know of, I'll go into a little bit about how we found out about those. We have a provincial reporting system. We've got apps, we've got online, we've got phone. We've been doing targeted community surveys and meetings with those impacted communities. The surveys specifically have focused on trying to figure out what the public education level is around flowering rush, what their tolerance levels for treatments are, because in British Columbia, similar to Alberta, there's lots of restrictions for aquatic herbicide use and other treatments as well. And then we've been putting up signs such as the one you see in the bottom middle here to help educate the public. So first of all, Hazak Lake. So this is the one down in the Fraser Valley. This is our largest infestation. It's also the one we've known about for the longest. So this was first reported in 1978, actually, by a botanist. Now, we first visited the site, the provincial government first visited the site in 2012, and that was around the beginning of our early detection rapid response program. And it was through doing those provincial scans in adjacent bordering jurisdictions that we identified that flowering rush was a priority that we needed to start paying attention to. So our action on flowering rush kind of mirrors that of Alberta quite closely, actually. Although Nicole and I didn't really connect until later in 2012. A bit of an oh my God moment. So as you can see here, down in the bottom, the Hazak system flows into the Fraser River, which is a very major river system in British Columbia. Our goal right now is to try to prevent it from getting into the Fraser River. So the red is where the flowering rush is in the system. Now this Hazak Lake area is almost entirely populated around the perimeter by private lands, which is really problematic. And then the lower section downstream of this highway here, this is a slough, so it's just farmland on either side. And here we have a pump station, so the water level in this system is heavily manipulated. We get water fluctuation levels of up to 2 meters. And then, oops, oh crap. And downstream of the pump station, which is right here, this is tidally influenced as well. So in terms of getting in to access the plants and find the plants, we have a very limited window in the fall. As I mentioned, 1978 was the first voucher collected here. We were able to verify the status. The plants were still present in 2012. The top left corner, there's an example of some of the extent of the patches we've got there. So our goal right now for this system is to prevent entry into the Fraser as a priority, and then to deplete the population, pushing it upstream. So in 2019, we prohibited the use of harvesters on this lake system because they were just chopping it up along with the Eurasian water milfoil and spreading it all over the place. The the lake users are really unhappy about that decision, but for the time being, it's limiting the ongoing spread in the lake system. And this is just buying us time because we're in the process of developing several treatment methods that in combination will be quite effective. So in 2019, we put on the pump station, which I pointed out earlier in the bottom left here, we tried putting some screening down below to prevent propagules from getting through the gates. We started doing a slow drawdown of the water levels in the fall in order just to slow the water velocity so we get fewer propagules being carried. And then in 2020, we finally managed to get a containment boom, like a proper containment boom in just between, there's a rail culvert and then there's the major highway bridge, which you see in the central picture here. So we were able to get the containment boom in between those two. And this was just no small feat just because of, we have to prevent flooding. We can't obstruct fish passage. And then of course, we're within a whole bunch of different easements and overlapping jurisdictions. So it's just been it's been like 6 years in getting this boom in place. And I will mention with this boom, it requires ongoing maintenance while it's in place. It's only in place for about 8 months out of the year because the high risk period where velocities get really high during storm season in the winter time, the boom just can't withstand those velocities. Now this boom is suspended 30 centimeters below the water level and it's weighted along the bottom. So we had to make an assumption here that because propagules appear buoyant for the most part, that they're traveling in the upper water column. And I did have a question to everybody. We weren't able to find any concrete information about where the propagules travel in the water column. So if anybody has more information about that, I'd be really interested to know. So right now we're assuming the top 30 centimeters. Sorry, that's metric. Anyhow, what we're looking at for treatments here in future, what we've done for last 2019 and 2020 is we've done manual removals downstream of the pump station to prevent the flowering rush from getting into the Fraser. And this has been just a massive mud slinging, digging, transporting solids by boat. It's been difficult work. We've managed to get it done 2 years in a row, so that's really great. We now need to push it all the way up to where this containment boom now is at the highway. And so we're looking at various things, potentially doing water drawdown so that we can do application of the diquat, which is a registered herbicide reward here in Canada, potentially the diquat under drier conditions, or just doing the drawdown so we can actually get in and access the plants through manual removal. And then we've got biocontrol under development. So this area is definitely, we're looking at it for primary biocontrol release, hopefully in 2021. We will see. And then we've trialed some suction dredging, and in the slough area, actually, suction dredging could work reasonably well. It's just a matter of being able to have enough water level to support the boat floating in order to get in there to reach the plants. Anyhow, I'm gonna move on to the next. Here's a picture of a bit of the flagging that's happened in the lower Hazak there. I covered up most of this. 2021, we're going to be completing a management plan specific to this water system because there's a lot of issues going on there all at once. And then, like Nicole mentioned, we've been working for the last 8 years on getting a federal registration for the equivalent of the US habitat. So ours would be Habitat Aqua, so active ingredient imazapyr, which would be just great for flowering rush. We, of course, then would have to go through a provincial permitting process, which is the really onerous part, but that's the next step. Okay, so Bushy Lake. So Bushy Lake is up in our Caribou area. This is our second largest infestation. We've been managing this one through suction dredging for about 4 or 5 years now, and we're actually seeing a really nice decline in the population density and distribution here. Now, it's worth mentioning in Bushy Lake, when the genotyping work was done, I guess John will be talking more about that later, the Bushy Lake population was found to be genetically unique to the other genotypes typically found in the Pacific Northwest. So that's just an FYI there. So the biocontrol we're looking at potentially releasing in 2021 is specific not to this population, but to the others. So it was first reported and verified in 2012. We got a containment boom installed. This is just a floating boom in the upper left corner at the outflow to this lake. And of course, we did extent surveys downstream and it has not spread out of this lake. Unfortunately, it's frozen over for multiple months in the year, which yeah, helps. We've done, as I said, the diver-assisted suction dredging and the digging, and we're seeing really good results with that. Okay, so our third population is in a Whistler golf course pond, as you can see in the bottom left here. This is where we've got it. The really cool thing about the flowering rush in BC is that each population is occurring in a really different site type. So this is challenging, but it's also really good because it allows us to try different treatment methods in each one. So the Whistler golf course pond is a private water body, which means that we can apply aquatic herbicide to this water body, registered herbicides, without going through the provincial permitting process, which is really huge for us. So we've been using diquat on this pond for the last 3 years now, I believe, and we are seeing some nice declines. Getting good contact with the plants remains a challenge. It's growing intermixed with a whole lot of cattail, which is challenging. So let's see here. We're using an extendable wand. We've tried doing the applications from shore and from boat. Right now, we're doing it from shore. We're finding that to be more effective. We have somebody go in and do the extent survey, identify every single stem, flag every single stem or patch just before the treatments occur, and that allows our sprayer to increase his contact a lot. And we have this site contained. So I should say, with all the sites we're talking about here, we have them all contained except for that first one at Hazak, which it's got the containment boom in place, but there is some of the population downstream of that containment boom. So we do have the pump station there, which is sort of a bit of a physical barrier, but we don't have complete containment on Hazak. We've got it everywhere else, thank goodness. So our fourth site, the Nexus Public Ornamental Pond, this is the one located in the Columbia Basin. It was actually reported by Nicole on her holidays last year, I think. So Nicole, next time you want to take holidays, give me a call because I have some other surveys that need to be done. Anyhow, the great one about this one is that it doesn't drain into the Upper Arrow Lake area, which you can see here. So it's just an isolated pond, which is awesome. Unfortunately, it was planted there by somebody, so we're trying to figure out where it came from. We're still trying to figure that one out. So it's an isolated patch, 6 to 10 plants. It was mechanically removed last year. And we revisited this year and no flowering rush could be found. So that's awesome. So we're going to continue monitoring it. So my second question to you guys is, how long do you think we need to monitor a site where there's no weed found before we can declare it eradicated? So, I mean, I haven't been able to find any literature concretely saying, you know, propagular viability ends on this date. The best I could find that was that seeds retain 68% viability after 5 years, right? So, and I mean, down in BC here, I think most of our spread is through the bulbils, the bulblets, the root fragments, and not the seed, right? So if anybody has any thoughts on that, that'd be great. Right now, I'm thinking 10 years might be 10 years of monitoring with no weed found before declaring eradicate might be a conservative route to go. But if anybody has thoughts on that, I'd really appreciate it. So yeah, that's what's going on in BC. I feel like we're in a pretty fortunate position here based on what everybody else has said, but at the same time, we have so many restrictions on what we can do, especially in and around water. So that has really slowed our progress a lot. But we're getting there. That's it.
Great. Thank you, Becky. I do have a question for you. From Robert Stevens asks, will the biocontrol for Hazak Lake be developed in Canada, or is that coming from the CABI efforts?
Right, so the biocontrol, I mean, British Columbia is a member of the CABI consortium, right, for developing the biocontrol. And so, you know, CABI does its development, and then on a provincial or state level, we have to work through our hoops in order to get to the point of primary release, right? So BC is at a stage in working with our federal counterparts at potentially doing primary release in 2021. So it'll be different for you guys, I imagine.
Okay, thank you. All right, I don't see any that are specific to you yet, any more than that. I guess I will, in the minute that we have here, and these are kind of bigger questions, so I'll get the first one is probably all we have time to cover. So from Bryce Christians, he asks, and it looks like, and I believe this is for everybody, this is that has presented so far, that it looks like a significant number of the survey points on the CWMA map are not showing up in the consortium for the Pacific Northwest or Berea. So is there any effort to make sure that that data is shared? And I'm not sure if Jen Parsons, you can speak to that or not, but I think that could be also duly noted for this, the CWMA to make a point of doing that. So.
Yeah, and the consortium of the herbaria only, I think the only data it has are actual herbarium samples. And so there aren't going to be herbarium samples from all of the populations. You know, I've sent some to the University of Washington herbarium, so they have a representative sample, but I certainly haven't sent samples from all the populations. So that might be, if I'm understanding the question correctly, that might be the reason.
Okay. All right, thank you, Jen, for taking a stab at that. All right, thank you, Becky. We're gonna wrap up that. So that's the end of our state and provincial updates. And now we are going to hear from Virgil Dupuis. And let's see, Virgil, you keep kind of bouncing out of the presenter spot. Let's see if I can pull you back over and have you present here. Just give me a moment. So Virgil, I've just made you presenter. If you want to unmute yourself, we should be able to hear you. I can see you on there. Well, I can see your PowerPoint. I just can't hear you, Virgil, so you may have to unmute.
Hello?
Hello?
I'm sorry, we're having technical difficulties.
I can hear you, so that's a good sign, and I can see your presentation on Flathead. So I think we're in good shape. Yeah, so go ahead.
Yep. Virgil.
How come it won't let me do it on my own computer? Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I don't know how to use it.
Just press the space bar.
Just run through it.
Okay.
Get in presenter mode.
Okay.
All right, are we there?
Looks good.
Okay, we're having Macintosh and PC problems here. I'm Virgil Dupuis with Salish Kootenai College in Pablo, Montana. We've been working on flowering rush starting back in 2000. We first noticed it really prominent when Flathead Lake failed to fill up to full pool. It was 2 feet below full pool all of the summer, and flowering rush is really becoming very visible. So we started being concerned about it. So we spent about 3 or 4 years starting to try to get a handle on where it was in the lake and the lower Flathead River. Jump forward to about 2007, we completed a spatial model of Flathead Lake at low pool, so we could look at the littoral zone, and we estimated then about 3/4 of the littoral zone, the 0 to 10 foot depth zone, would be subject to invasion primarily due to substrate. And also the 10 to 20 foot zone, also we estimated would be about 3/4 infested with flowering rush over the years. In about 2009, actually a little bit earlier, we started herbicide treatments. Peter Rice at University of Montana conducted a bunch of bucket trials screening aquatic herbicides for potential use with flowering rush. But we settled on, for our area, low pool treatments with clear cast and habitat seemed to give us the best results. We did water column injections. We have an ongoing project where we had 6 years of sequential treatments with habitat and clear cast. We've done some work trying to document the environmental impacts, both the impacts to native fish, and macroinvertebrates. Lately, in the last 5 years or so, we've been assisting some flathead lakeshore owners implement controls. We've been assisting them with identification and permitting. And right now, we're spending quite a bit of time coordinating the formation of the Flathead Lake Flowering Rush Controls Project on the south end of the lake. Some of the driving issues that we see here, some of the questions that we need to address with flowering rush. What are the cumulative impacts of flowering rush if not addressed? Well, expansion of closed water vegetated habitats for one. What are the impacts to bull trout and west slope cutthroat? It's been shown that invasive fish do prey fairly heavily on bull trout and west slope in the flathead system. And how does flowering rush, or does flowering rush facilitate invasive fish? It creates habitat conducive for bass, perch, and northern pike. And those all affect lake trout as well. So how will expanding flowering rush and northern pike perhaps impact the Columbia River salmon and bull trout populations? And then the impacts on property values, loss of recreation, water quality, and agricultural impacts. So some of our flowering rush work, this is a Google Earth shot of the Ducharme fishing access area in East Bay of Flathead Lake, where we've had 6 years of sequential treatments with habitat and clearcast. And they've yielded both approximately 80% rhizome depletion. And we look at rhizomes as the key for trying to contain and reduce the impacts of this plant. This is a typical marina. We've been treating this, I think, for 4 years now. The landowners are very happy with it. They're able to block that little channel coming through there so we can actually treat over that now. The first year or two, we had to leave a strip right down the middle of flowering rush because we couldn't treat that close to standing water. But with a little landowner cooperation and some work with a shovel, a hand shovel, they can stop that. These people reported they had basically lost use of this marina. I think about 50 people have access rights to it. And now people are starting to use the marina again because we have suppressed the flowering rush. We're using all handgun applications right now. With the number of treatment sites we've had, we haven't been able to look at mechanized equipment, boomless sprayers and that sort of thing. Plus we do have a lot of rocks to deal with, a lot of docks, I'm sorry, and a lot of other features on the lake bed that would make it difficult with that kind of equipment. But for larger tracks, when we start treating larger tracks, we'll need some other way of treatment besides this. And a lot of our spots are small. They quite frankly are small. We have a lot of boat ramps, things like this. The lower pictures are a failed attempt at a bottom barrier. Those really won't work in this area, I don't think. The landowners aren't going to maintain them, and they get torn up. And so I don't think bottom barriers are going to really do much for us. So some of the challenges, we've identified 300 individual sites, landowners around the south end of the lake that have small spots or larger spots of flowering rush. Today, we have about 100 individual landowners who have signed up and showed interest for 2021 treatments. We have money from the Montana Department of Natural Resources for cost sharing. And we did have Army Corps of Engineer money, but we could not implement this last April. We couldn't get the money and we couldn't get the project approved soon enough. Large patches, which we do have some large patches, I'll show you in a map a little bit later. We haven't addressed those in this because some of those patches are several hundred acres. And that's going to take a lot more scoping with different stakeholders, the tribes particularly. I think there's a big feeling that those patches may be best for biocontrol efforts. We do have an environmental assessment meeting requirements of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. It's in draft form. I want to get that back for final review within the next couple of weeks if we can, so we can go ahead and get that approved, hopefully by the first of the year. We've addressed most of the comments. We didn't have very many negative comments at all. Actually, we had one that was sent to us through a third party. Most of the comments, all the comments have been quite good, quite frankly. There is disagreement, I think, in the biological community whether flowering rush is a big deal or not. And that's just kind of a personal, professional opinion, I guess. We have many biologists that are very concerned about it and others who aren't. Landowners typically do become very concerned about it. We have to do a pesticide use permit, an EPA pesticide use permit, once we have the final application sites identified. And then we have to go through some kind of contracting process, bidding out. This will be very difficult to do because the tracks are quite a ways apart from each other right now. We don't have all the landowners lined up. That's going to take some time. We have logistics and permitting. That's all going to take quite a bit of time to hand walk through 100 of these applications. And then ongoing funding for planning and implementation is critical for something like this. If we're going to try to reduce this rhizome using these methods, it's going to take, somebody mentioned from Canada, I guess, what, 10 years, and we have 6 years and we still have maybe 20% by weight of active rhizomes in our treatment blocks. So I'll conclude this part of the talk just with this fantastic picture of East Bay and Flathead Lake. Flowering rush in our area doesn't typically look like this. This is the only time I've seen it like this, and that photo was taken back in 2008. So hopefully we can not have a lot of those kind of photos around out there. We do have a story map online, and I think it'll come up. Yeah, this is our mapping to date on the south end of the lake. And the red, it's different years of mapping, of more intense mapping. The red was earlier mapping done, I think 3 years ago. The green was updated last fall. And then the yellow line around there is actually the low pool of Flathead Lake, which is kind of a handy mark to have when you're doing this kind of work. I'm not going to go through this whole story map because this is intended for the general public. So there's a lot of information, a little information, identification, some of the herbicide treatments we've been doing, and what people need to do if they want to participate. They can fill out a form online. We also have been contacting them by mail, a lot of phone calls and things like that. This is our updated flowering rush map, and I'll just try to zoom in here and show some of the kind of the information we have. The infestation on the east side of the lake is significantly different, as Craig mentioned. It's in marinas, in some docks. The east side of the lake is mainly gravel bed, but flowering rush does grow up through gravel. I've seen it. It grows up through 10 inches of gravel. The east shore is also gravel, but there's also more protected coves and whatnot. And then also the water, the natural direction of travel is towards the west end of the lake, west side of the lake. So we have inventoried the lake and identified these sites, and we've mapped sites. We do have adjacent landowners identified, so we can find out who we're dealing with fairly quickly in the field. And then we can also hopefully navigate to these either by boat or by road, depending on how the contractor decides to try to treat them. And along with this, we should have on each polygon, which these aren't very big polygons particularly, they're, well, it's not quite working, but it does work. The infestation.
Virgil, we have about 1 minute left here.
Okay, I'm done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? What I was going to say is the polygon shape and size will come up, and the challenge is going to be when the contractor goes out there and tries to find these 5 square foot pieces of infestation at low pool, because sometimes the straw is going to be disappearing and it's going to be hard to see. So I anticipate having to send a staffer out there who's somewhat familiar to accompany the applicators. No questions.
I don't see any questions for you yet, Virgil. However, this is a fantastic project with the story map. If you want to share this link with me, I'm happy to put it onto share it via the listserv so everyone can see this later. That platform is really fantastic, so it's worth sharing. So
Yeah, the link's in my PowerPoint.
okay, super.
That's how I got. That's how I got to it.
Well, so I don't see any questions for you. So thank you so much for sharing. I think that was fantastic. We are just a few minutes behind schedule, but what I think we're going to do, we're scheduled to take a break, or we're in our break right now. If everybody wants to take 5 minutes, but we will start at the bottom of the hour just to stay on schedule. So we'll restart at 11:30 Mountain or 10:30 Pacific, wherever you are, and we'll begin with talking about Water Resource Development Act update from there. So take a quick stretch break, and we'll be back in just a few moments here to continue on. So thank you.
Thank you. Where's the you changed the this is different than my view. I don't get the characteristics of the
Hold on, let me mute you.
Okay, we got about another minute before we're going to start up again, but I just wanted to address one of the questions or / comments that was added related to the biocontrol. So Rob Bouchier mentioned that for the biocontrol release petition, which I believe would be for Canada, is still in preparation, well, and or the United States, and Jen Andreas will be talking specifically on biocontrol. So it said with some testing finishing is likely at least 2022 and more like 2023 for a review decision. So I just wanted to verbalize that. Oh, and here we are at the bottom of the hour. So we are going to start up again here to keep us on track. So next we have kind of a co-presentation here with Stephen Phillips with Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, who is here. I can see you, Stephen. And then also Damian Walter with U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, who's going to be joining to update on information as well. So Stephen, if you want to go ahead and, did you have a presentation you wanted to share? I can just see a Word document right now.
What does the Word document say?
It's the agenda, which
Yeah.
is great because it's, you know, on topic.
Okay. How
There
about
it
that?
is. I
All
see
right.
it now. Yep,
You ready?
go for it.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. Very interesting talks. It's good to get caught up on flowering rush. I'm going to be talking about the Water Resources Development Act, the legislative part. Lots of moving pieces, so let's get started. It goes by many different acronyms depending on which year it passed, but we mostly call it WRDA just for easiness. First passed in 2014, and that's when the Congress put in that language, Secretary may establish watercraft inspection stations in the Columbia River Basin for the states of Idaho, Oregon, Washington, and Montana. Following that, a federal, the FY16 budget appropriated $4 million to set up the watercraft inspection program. Representatives, and this went across the aisle, Democrats, Republicans, Simpson, DeFazio, Thompson from California, who we'll talk about later, Senator Patty Murray, the Montana delegation, really important getting that money in there. There was another WRDA, or WIN, as it was called. The reauthorization was passed in 2016. And then in April 2017, we signed an agreement, the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, and that's why I'm here, to manage as the non-federal partner the watercraft inspection program on behalf of the states of Oregon, Idaho, Montana, Washington. In May 2017, $1 million was added in the 17 federal budget, which allowed for monitoring, the $1 million. So we started the cost share agreement as the administrator with the 4 states and also with Portland State University and Washington State University on the monitoring end. Then in March of 2018, with our friends from Oregon, Senators Wyden and Merkley added in flowering rush. And they put $1 million in there for control of flowering rush. Nationwide program, 50-50 cost share. But for a lot of reasons that we will not get into today, Oregon was excluded. But we'll come back to that in the next slide. So then to go on the timeline of WRDA, October 2018, WRDA is reauthorized, and they put in some rapid response language, which I think Damian will talk a little bit about because that's ongoing. The 2018 WRDA authorization also brought us the expansion, as we're calling it, where they added in additional river basins for watercraft inspection and monitoring program. There was a type error in it. They had Arizona River Basin, it should have been Arkansas, and you'll see that's going to be fixed hopefully soon. Now, you have to jump back and forth between the legislation reauthorizing WRDA and the appropriations because language does get put in, like with flowering rush. The appropriators say, we want to fund flowering rush. So that's where the appropriations vehicle comes in. And in FY20, this is the funding for, we're in the next fiscal year, but this was for up through September 30th, but it obviously runs forward with these funds. $15 million watercraft inspection, $3 million to monitoring. And then what the appropriators did, and thanks to Senators Wyden and Merkley and others, they added the words monitoring and surveys into the 2020 WRDA appropriations. And that means now that Oregon can participate, but of course they don't have a match now. So that's, but the good news is going forward, Oregon will be able to participate this, and that's Tim Butler's program. Okay, so what is going on this year in appropriations? The appropriations in the House has been completed, and you can see the numbers there. $15 million for watercraft inspection, $3 million for monitoring. They say money should be given to invasive aquatic plants, flying rush, and they added hydrilla. There's also a statement in there about non-chemical methods should be used to combat the spread of aquatic plant species. We've seen this in several appropriation bills, not only here, but also in the Department of Interior. Just the non-chemical aspect. In the Senate, appropriations look like they once again put in, this just came out, to $1 million for flowering rush, $6 million for research to address aquatic invasive plants within the Corps, $11 million for watercraft inspection stations, which is below the $15 million in the House, and $2 million for monitoring, which is below the $3 million in the House. So what now for the 2020 word reauthorization? So the House has passed its bill. The Senate is about to pass its bill, we do believe. Then they'll go to a conference committee to finalize it. And then it needs to be signed by the president. And then, of course, the other thing that is looming, but at this point, I don't think it's a concern, but it's 2020. Anything can happen. The lawmakers have just a month before there's a federal shutdown. December 11th, what's today, the 12th? They may extend this a couple more weeks. We'll know in early December whether this thing's going to flop over into next year, this 20 in the reauthorization. If it does, it's done. So hopefully they'll get this thing done, because if not, they're going to have to roll it and start the process again next year. But everybody seems to think that this word reauthorization will happen. And there's a lot of new stuff in it. In the House reauthorization bill, they fixed the Arkansas-Arizona problem they had. They also add the Russian River as one of the basins to go with all the other basins that were added in 2018. Update on invasive species policy guidance. I don't know a lot about this within the Corps. Maybe Damien can touch on it. But what they do is they call out high altitude lakes and the Tennessee and Cumberland River basins. Now here's all the stuff that's in the 2020 word reauthorization, S3591. And you'll see that as I bring these slides up, that all of this text is in the AIS News. You go to that link, go to the May 4th issue, and scroll down near the bottom, and there's all the legislative stuff, and you can see it. So there's a lot of sections in here: invasive species in impaired waters, aquatic invasive species research, invasive species mitigation and reduction. This is kind of interesting because authorizes $10 million in appropriations for 2021 through 2024 to support watercraft inspection stations along the U.S. border with Canada. Very interesting. And also a pilot program in collaboration with the states in the upper Mississippi River Basin. The purpose would be to develop voluntary aquatic invasive species management plans. So interesting. There's a terrestrial noxious weed control pilot program I'm sure some of you would be interested in. It's an invasive species assessment and risk prioritization for South Florida. There's Asian carp. They've got aquatic invasive species prevention, and this kind of helps define more where Asian carp money will go in the upper Mississippi and Ohio River basins. There's an invasive species in Alpine Lakes pilot program. You can read Lake Tahoe there. So this bill is out. It's report language. The Senate reauthorization bill, it was filed on 11/9. I looked this morning, and thankfully for this presentation, I didn't have to try to pick out anything. There could be additional language, additional report language to this bill, and meaning that whatever's in there, they got to take all of the stuff from both the House and the Senate, get to their conference committee, and then try to figure out and what the funding levels and what all that stuff I just went through, what they're going to include. I got a feeling for the Watercraft inspection program, since they funded it at $15 million last year, they'll do so. Flowering Rush is going to get $1 million. If this bill passes, Flowering Rush will get money. Now, it'll be interesting to see if the hydrilla part gets added in as well. So we'll see. Oh, my dentist calling. Hang on. There. So this is what for Watercraft inspection station and monitoring, and keep in mind that Flowering Rush is a national program, but for the Watercraft inspection and monitoring program and eventually rapid response, here are your basins. Arkansas is going to be fixed. The Arizona type error will be changed to Arkansas if the bills pass. And then the Russian River, you see that there, and that if the Russian River gets included in the conference, then that will become available for award of funding. And one of the reasons that's in there, one of our friends in WRDA, in getting invasive species into WRDA for the West for a watercraft inspection and monitoring and later Flowering Rush program, was Representative Thompson from California. And that Russian River area, that's part of Representative Thompson's district. So interesting how that works. There's our website. You can go to the news tab and see past issues where I mentioned in the PowerPoint on specific portions of the appropriation and reauthorization bills. If you have questions, please send me an email. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Damien, are you going to share your screen, Damien?
No, I don't have any slide. I was just going to touch base on the Flowering Rush, since that's what this primary focus of this meeting was.
Okay, perfect. Go for it.
I'll try to keep you more. I'll keep you more on time. I won't go into all the rapid response and what all the word of language might end up being, because we always have to do guidance and how that plays out. So for Flowering Rush, we do, as Walla Walla District, we're the one basically working on what we call like the letter report. It's justification report. Was signed Tuesday by our commander and being sent up to our division. So this is probably key for the states as to, that's the cost share, the 50-50. So hopefully that'll get signed in the next week or so, go up through the process at our division. And then that allows our commander to sign an agreement that we'll have with PSMFC with Stephen in administering that program for Flowering Rush in the states. So that's when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about the Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. So you'll probably see soon, we'll be reaching out for scopes of work from the state, our counterparts, to get those into PSMFC so we can review that. Kind of what game plan is. I'll do the technical review on that, and hopefully that'll be, get that going in process as we're getting the agreement in place. So hopefully once we sign the agreement, then we can get out rolling and folks can be reimbursed for those efforts that they're going to do this year. So yeah, one thing I did want to touch on is, with basically if hydrilla is added, that's a big issue back east and in other areas. So we'll have to see what shakes out in the final appropriation. But basically, then there's more, as I say, more hands putting their hands in the cookie jar. So if there's any quick questions, I'll try to keep us on pace here, Leah.
I don't see anything. I don't see anything yet here. So I'm going to say
Yeah,
that's
like
a
that.
no. Sometimes there's a little delay in timing, but I think we're good. If there's no questions for Damien, yeah, the hydrilla question will be a big one, won't it? Okay. So time will tell. Okay, so if we have no questions on that, but if, you know, and as stuff occurs to you guys as you're listening, please feel free to put that in the question box, or also in the chat, and that also works. So we're going to do a little switch here on the agenda. Just going to flip John Gaskin and Jen for presenting. And just there was a logical thing to make that change. So here I'm going to hand the screen to you, John, and he is with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and the screen's all for you.
All right, so I need to
Great.
show screen, show my screen, hang on. Are you seeing my screen yet?
I can see an Excel spreadsheet.
That's not great. Can you tell it to let me share the screen again? So I can make a choice. I'm trying to make a choice. Ah, there we go. Hang on. How about that?
Perfect. Yes.
Okay,
I see
great.
PowerPoint. Go for it.
Hi, everyone. I'm John Gaskin with USDA ARS out in Montana, and I'm going to talk a little about Butomus genotyping, an update on that. Here's our basic map of North America and the genotypes that we find. They're color coded there, and I'll just go through it real quick as to sort of any updates or anything important. Genotype 1 is our common, almost always triploid genotype that is pretty much the blue one that you can see out in our Pacific Northwest, also out in Saskatchewan. It's also found going toward the Midwest into the lakes, and then even in the extreme east in Maine, and I think it's Vermont, they have it up there too. The weird genotype 2 that they talked about on Bushy Lake, that's the only place it's found in North America, is right up on that lake, so that's kind of wacky. Genotype 3, like Jen Parsons mentioned, is in central Washington, also found down at Klamath Falls in Oregon, and you can find it in the Midwest also. Genotype 4 we don't deal with out here. That was the main attention from the eastern USA and Canada, because that's the green genotype that's pretty much along their riverways out there. That's a big problem, but we don't seem to have it at all. It's a diploid. And then there's a genotype 5, really rare, you don't care, but it's out near Minneapolis. And a genotype 6 is a wacky thing up there in Saskatchewan that just shows up, I think, 2 plants. And a genotype 9, which is in I think it's a fountain or a pond. Maybe you can correct me, I think, Nicole. So not widespread, and probably someone just planted it there. New things that I've gotten, people are really kind and they send a lot of samples to us for genotyping, but Nate Harms with Army Corps sent me something from one of the more southern collections in Nebraska, and it's a genotype 4 down there. And the folks from Idaho County, as Jeremy indicated, sent me something that was in a pond that apparently they've about got eradicated, but it was a genotype 1 in Idaho. So that's sort of where the genotypes are. Why that matters, I'll talk about a little in the future, but we've been looking for origins of the genotypes, and the places we look are the native range, which is pretty much Northern Europe kind of thing, and you can find it all the way out toward China and Japan. I don't know how much of that's native range and how much of that was moved and planted, but CABI has pretty much done most of their searching through the Northern Europe to find something, find matches for ours for biocontrol. Now, so why does the genotype matter? Well, here's a little evidence toward that. Nate Harms with Army Corps did a paper, he did a common garden experiment where he was looking at the diploid that's mostly found in the east, color swap, sorry about that, but that would be the purple ones on my little map. And the triploid, which is our genotype 1 that's blue out here in the Pacific Northwest. And he found that, well, there's certainly a difference in how much these things got hit by just general diseases, not any biocontrol disease, but just some diseases that are running around where he had his common garden. And so the diploid had a higher proportion of disease than our triploid. Well, that's kind of good news for us, but it also mattered by where the latitude of where the plants, the rhizomes they got and brought down to the common garden. So things from higher latitudes had less disease on them for the triploids. That's his black line slanting down to the right in my little chart. And the diploids, when they came from higher latitudes, they had more disease incidence. So we can talk about that on the side sometime. We can talk about DNA methylation or different phenotypes or some maternal effects of the plants he brought to his common garden. But point being, different genotypes probably get attacked differently from different diseases, and it's going to vary by disease too. So as they're looking for one of the avenues of biocontrol, and Jen's going to talk about biocontrol, but they were looking at some diseases that attack it in its native range. And Cabby UK was looking at that for a smut. You can see a picture on the right of the smut on a leaf there. But they had our genotypes out there in the UK that were shipped to them, and the smut would not attack genotype 1, which is our big, most common genotype, the triploid from out in the Pacific Northwest. So that was a problem. So here's a little scatter plot of their genotype similarity. Don't look too closely, but basically we had found nothing that matched our genotype 1, which is really the common thing we have in North America, Western North America. But then Patrick with Cabby in Switzerland did a great thing, was doing more collections, and he went up into the Netherlands, to Leeuwarden in the Netherlands. He sent me samples from about 3 or 4 populations. We genotyped them, and some of those plants in one population from the Netherlands are an exact match for our genotype 1, our blue genotype in North America. So that means now folks can go over there into the Netherlands, look around those populations, see if there are any diseases attacking those plants, and hopefully they would be not so picky about what they attack, and they would attack our genotype 1. So that's where they're going on that angle. We also look at ploidy of these things because, you know, most people say, yeah, the genotype 1 is triploid, genotype 4, the out east is diploid. And here's just little pictures of we either use flow cytometry to break up the cells and look what's in them to figure out ploidy, or actually the nice folks at UC Davis, USDA, ARS did some actual, like you may have done in biology, looking at those chromosomes and counting them in squashed cells. The gist of that is that almost all of our genotype 1, the blue one, is triploid, 3X there, except Jennifer found some really interesting things at the Prosser diversion dam that looked to be diploid, a little bit wacky. Like to look more into that. Bushy Lake is a triploid. Genotype 3, which is the one that's in Oregon and central Washington, appears to be a diploid. Genotype 4 out east, sorry about the color swaps, is diploid, but you don't care, that's not from around here. Neither is genotype 5. Genotype 6, we've never looked at that because we need fresh material to do that stuff. So what are our next steps here? We, with the Dice-K and some others out at Cabby UK, are going to herbarium collections from Asia and Europe and looking for DNA samples that they can get from those herbarium collections. They're going to send them to us for genotyping for a wider range of things. We looked a little into some Chinese samples already that the folks at CSIRO in Australia were up there doing some work. So they sent those to Nate Harms. He sent them to us. They were not a match for any of our genotypes. But the gist is, you know, we need to look at samples from maybe India, Japan, Kazakhstan, Russia. There's a lot of areas where we haven't searched for origins of our genotype 1, and we can do DNA matches to do that. We'll see if we find any other places that might be origins, because we might have to look in more places to find any disease that wants to attack it. Also, we have a quarantine in City, Montana, and probably next season, we will start rearing weevils in quarantine, the weevils that Jen's going to talk about, to build up the numbers for eventual release. So if you have any questions about genotyping or about our eventual plans to rear these things up, there's my email right there. And that's all I've got. Thanks, Leah.
Great, John, thank you. I don't see a question here directly for you, but I had a question. I was curious about what your methods were for, I guess, soliciting samples to, determine genotypes? Like, do you just rely on that somewhat organically, or do people in the know they should send them to you? I guess I'm just curious about how you solicit collecting random specimens from people.
Yeah, it's been pretty organic. People have been really good about sending samples. I'm writing up the paper right now as we speak. So for my purposes of putting out a paper about where the genotypes are and things like that, I'm done. But would be very interested if you have a population from an area that has not been genotyped. I think that is kind of cool, because we might find something weird. But if you just have samples from say along the river where we've already genotyped a lot of things, we probably don't have the time for that. But new things would be kind of cool. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, John. Okay, so Jen Andreas is our next presenter. And she is with Washington State, and I can see your screen. You look like you're ready to go.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, John, for switching at the last minute there. I think that will make this a little bit smoother for people to understand how important genotypes are to the biocontrol component. So this is actually a presentation by me, but also all of this work is, well, the lion's share of this work is really Patrick Hafliger, and I understand that Patrick may be on listening to this. So if I can't answer questions and he's able to, that might be an option for us. So thanks for being here, Patrick, when it's so late. So this project has a lot of different partners, and we have our CABI people, and I'll talk about them specifically. But this presentation is really based on CABI's work. John just spoke. We have partners with Department of Ecology, Montana, Washington State Department of Agriculture, the Army Corps of Engineers has been a big partner. Susan Turner with BC Ministry of Forest Lands, Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development. I kind of like to just say that as a test. So I'm sure Becky has to hear that all the time. And then also Nicole Kimmel with Alberta. So most of you probably already have an understanding of how this biocontrol consortium came to be. And that is really that that control of flowering rush is incredibly challenging. And so we sort of looked at it as we're likely going to need a biocontrol agent down the line, even though in many areas it's still considered an EDRR species. So as you also probably know, flowering rush is the only species within the Butamaceae family, and this really increases the likelihood that we will find something that's host specific. So a really great target weed to work on. Biocontrol may provide us a long-term solution, especially in some of these areas that we're seeing images of, which are kind of shocking and hard to swallow. So we did form this consortium in 2013 with partners from multiple states and provinces, along with CABI Switzerland. And if you're not familiar with CABI, they are a not-for-profit organization, and they're really the experts in biocontrol research and development. And so they're one of the primary groups that we go to try and find biocontrol agents. So once we had this consortium put together, we needed to pursue funding sources. And to our delight, this has been a really, this has been a project that people are really interested in. And so it has been fairly well funded compared to other biocontrol programs. So we have funding from Army Corps, the Forest Service, several agencies within Montana, Washington, and as Becky mentioned, in Canada, they are funding the biocontrol program as well. So once funding was in place, CABI Switzerland was able to get started on doing the beginning parts of work in terms of literature surveys and also field surveys. And so this is a map of the places that have been surveyed within Europe. And then you can see there was some work done in Kazakhstan and also in Georgia. You can see, so most of the area is this region, but they are looking in other areas. So within the literature work, they found that 18 insects and 6 fungal pathogens were recorded to develop on flowering rush. And 6 of these were insects recorded as monophagous. We have narrowed this down. I won't go into the other ones, but we have narrowed this down to looking at 3 primary promising agents, and I'll speak about each of those. So the first is Bagus nagelosis. This is a weevil, and it's the one that's furthest along in the process of biocontrol development. The adults live mainly underwater. This is the adult here. The larvae develop in the leaves and rhizomes between May and September. And so this is the reason that it was really the rhizomes that we wanted to hit. So this is the reason that this insect sort of rose to the top of our interest. Interestingly, as Patrick has done his work, he's discovered that the larvae will leave the plants and swim to other plants. And it's not really clear why they're doing that, but it has added an interesting element to the older adults, and they found them at a lot more sites than they thought. So that's good news. So they're able to collect weevils in larger numbers than they thought they would. So host specificity testing began in 2016, and they've been conducting those tests for 4 years. One of the most conservative tests that you can do when you start testing of biocontrol agents for its host range is by doing these no-choice oviposition tests. So what that means is that you take a female who's ready to lay eggs, and you give her the option of laying on a non-target plant or not laying on it. If she will lay her eggs on it, that could potentially mean that it's within her host range. If she refuses to lay her eggs on it, it means that those we can eliminate it from testing. And so they've, you can see this, the setup of what this looks like. You expose the weevils to cut leaves of the test plant and also controls for 2 days. They did look at 45 different test plant species. What they found
excuse me, Jen,
was that there was only one incidence of on Beldelia.
Jen,
yeah. Sorry.
It looks, I'm not sure if your bandwidth is kind of wavering. If you may want to close your camera so we can maybe just hear you instead of, because there's a little bit of wavering with hearing you and seeing you. So give that a try.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I meant to mention that earlier. I don't know what happened to my internet, but it's not as good as it used to be. So, I'll just maybe start this slide again, and hopefully, hopefully picked up on what they found. There's only one incident of egg laying, and that only happened once in one test, and that was on Beldelia ranunculoides, which is a European species. So we really feel confident that this was just like a weird glitch, and not a real issue. There was some adult feeding on 2 species, Belicineria americanus. This is an image here in the right corner of what that looks like, and also Blixus berti. So Belicineria is a North American species, so we will need to look at this a little bit more, but really it's likely not too concerning. So tests were completed in 2020. Oh boy, here we go. My keyboard goes out randomly sometimes. I seem to have a lot of technical issues. So one of the challenges that came up is initially we're thinking this looks really great. The adults don't want to lay eggs on anything, so we're in good shape. But once Patrick discovered that the larva will actually leave the plants and go out, leave the plants and then be out exposed to the environment, we really needed to see whether the larva will choose a host as well, or choose any non-target species. And so in order to do this, they did no-choice larval establishment tests, and those were done over the last 2 years. And they exposed 3 larvae to cut leaves for 5 days, and they did this on 41 test plant species. Most of the larvae were found dead, and however, the ones that were on flowering rush had developed into their second instars. So clearly this method works for testing. They did find some feeding and a live larva on 3 different species, Limnobium levigatum, which is a South American species, Hydrocharis morsus rene, which is a European species, and Elisma plantago aquatica, which is a European species. But when they went back and gave gave the larva the option to either feed on flowering rush or feed on any of these species. They did not find any attack. And so we feel very confident that this insect is very host specific. We are going to do some additional Nobium species. So given how host specific it looks to be, we are hoping to submit the petition in the spring of 21. We'll continue to do some final testing, but because the process for getting these petitions through can take so long, we want to get this started and then we can supplement data. So there is some impact data as well, and they found that up to 30% reduction above ground and 50% in below ground biomass was found in experimental setups, and that was combined adult and larval feeding. There was regrowth after weevils were removed, and the larval feeding was not fully measurable because there's still some pretty high larval mortality. The second insect is a fly, Phytolyromyza ornata, and it's found in a variety of different areas. And initially we weren't that excited about it because it only mines in the leaves and flowers, flowering stems. And so we really wanted something to get into those rhizomes. But after Patrick worked on it for a number of years, he discovered that plants were wilting within 2 to 3 weeks after exposure to one female. And there were up to 11 pupa emerging. So this is what that damage looks like. So that's pretty exciting. And so host specificity testing began in 2019. And they've been able to test 17 test plant species with no development so far. And early impact experiments look like 10% biomass reduction. This is not a Harry Potter reductio, but this could increase with longer exposure time. The last biocontrol agent that we're looking at is Dosantia neslii, and this was work that was started by Carol Ellison at CABI UK. And we were really sad to have lost Carol this year. She passed away. And we really appreciate all of her work on the project. But this work has been continued by Sarah Thomas and Daisuke and at CABI UK. So this is a white smut with a lot of potential for high damage. There are examples of where white smuts have been used successfully on other plants. They've collected it in Germany and France, and they are looking at the life cycle. So this has 2 different spore types, and they attack the plant in different ways. And I won't go into that potential biocontrol agent. It will infect completely submerged. And so that's really great for a lot of our plant areas where our plants are growing fully submerged and we can't use those contact herbicides. So one of the challenges with using this white smut is it tends to be very host specific, and so host specific that it's really specific to genotype. And so the strain that they collected in France and Germany will attack this Bushy Lake, this genotype 2 that Becky was talking about, and it will kill those plants. But unfortunately, it's not attacking our primary genotypes, genotype 1. And so what we really need to do is find a strain of this pathogen that will attack our genotype 1. And the excitement about the Netherlands site is that we now have an opportunity to look for that. So we know where the genotype 1 can be found. And so surveys in the Netherlands can be ramped. They've done some initial host specificity testing and found that all the test plant species were immune to the pathogen. So the 21 plan for CABI is to submit the petition and continue additional testing with Vegas, just finalize that, and work on rearing. The fly will continue rearing and measuring impacts and host specificity testing. And then Dosantia will continue looking at those Netherlands sites and possibly beyond. And as John said, talked about herbarium samples. So in terms of the bigger consortium, we're always looking to cultivate new North American partners. We do need to pursue additional funding. I think we're going to have some funding challenges in the next year or two. And so this is something that's pretty critical for us to move forward. And then because we're getting close to having the putting in a petition for the weevil, we do need to start strategizing an implementation plan for what that looks like. So this is my contact information and Patrick's email. And there, if you aren't on it already, we do have a listserv for this program. So with that, I think I am out of time and I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Jen. That was great. So yes, we are now moving to our next presenter, who is, oh, let's see, I can't find you in my list. There you are. Bradley Sartine, who is with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, is going to be talking about a control technique with flowering rush. And you should be good to go, Bradley. I can see you. And you're...
Is it showing the presenter view or the slide view?
It's showing the one that for you presenter as opposed to for us audience. So I can see both. Your note slide is what I see. Yep. Your next slide.
Even now?
Yep. Yep. Perfect. There you go. Looks good, Bradley. Go for it.
Good to go.
Yep.
Appreciate the opportunity to present today. I'm a research biologist at the Engineering Research and Development Center in Vicksburg, Mississippi. And I specialize in the management of aquatic vegetation, primarily the chemical control aspect. Today, I'm just going to provide some information about the work we've been doing on the Columbia River for controlling flowering rush. But prior to that, I did want to introduce the ERDIC Aquatic Plant Management Team and just highlight some of our capabilities and the types of services that we do provide. So the Aquatic Plant Management Control Team is comprised of several researchers at the U.S. Army Corps ERDIC and remote locations as well. Myself, Drs. Kurt Getzinger and Nathan Harms are located in Vicksburg, Mississippi, and Drs. Chris Mudge and Ben Sperry are located at LSU, Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge, and University in Florida in Gainesville. Our team mission is to provide research and development services to selectively manage nuisance vegetation in public waters and wetlands. And we have several different research and development focus areas, but this presentation is going to primarily focus on the chemical control aspect. So our responsibilities from the chemical control aspect include in-house research and development to improve the use of US EPA registered products for managing invasive aquatic vegetation. And this includes refining current management strategies as well as developing new management strategies for new invaders. We also serve as subject matter experts on chemical control issues for resource management agencies and collaborate with registrants to develop and evaluate products for use across the U.S. We kind of follow from the laboratory to the label approach that typically begins with small scale testing followed by field verification research. So just some of our in-house facilities that we utilize for these small scale tests include environmental growth chambers, greenhouses, outdoor mesocosms, and small experimental ponds. And we use these resources to develop baseline data sets prior to taking that data to the field for verification. So as far as our field verification studies, we do these nationwide, anywhere from Lake Okeechobee in southern Florida to the Columbia River in Washington State. And these studies are very important because each water body is unique, and although you have the same problematic species in one area, or say two different water bodies, each water body may require a completely different management approach to be effective. So just go ahead and jumping into the flowering rush research. We've seen quite a few presentations already today highlighting a number of issues that flowering rush can cause, so I'm not going to spend too much time on going through all of this, and I'll just jump right into our study site on the Columbia River. Where we're doing this work is the McNary Pool around the Tri-Cities area of Washington. Priest Rapids Dam is on the upstream end with McNary Dam on the downstream. A pretty large drainage area, 214,000 square miles. And I believe flowering rush was first documented here in 2008. And there's a photo of some flowering rush growing there around the Port of Pasco Osprey Point, which I'll provide a little bit more information on that site later in the presentation. So in 2018, when this project initially began, our first round of field studies was primarily focused around gathering water exchange information from various portions of the pool. So we tried to select a number of sites that had different type of flow characteristics, because depending on flow and what type of water exchange you have in a particular area, can really depend on what control methods you use, because you got to get adequate exposure time depending on which products you're looking into incorporating into your management plan. So we selected a number of sites, high, moderate, and low flow. And in addition to that, we selected a site to evaluate bubble curtains as a potential method to reduce water exchange. Get into that in the next slide. So here's where we did the bubble curtain evaluations at Clover Island and the Notch. We did a very good site for this. We could stage all the equipment and everything we needed. Very convenient for this first proof of concept testing in 2018. So for these water exchange evaluations, we use rhodamine WT dye, which is a fluorescent inert non-toxic dye, and we applied at 10 parts per billion. It's very concentrated, and when you put it out, it really mimics a submerged herbicide application. You can see that image on the right there. That's a action shot of the dye getting put out over some flowering rush for a water exchange evaluation. And then we overlay that site with a series of predetermined points, and we can go to each point at various time intervals and read the concentration of dye in the water column with a fluorometer, and we can really get a good idea of how long that dye is present within that site and how it could relate to herbicide dissipation out of that site. As far as the bubble curtain, it's actually made by a Canadian company called Canadian Pond Products. It's just basically a durable and flexible aeration tubing. It has a series of holes that run along the side. They make it in several different versions or sizes, anywhere from 1/2 inch to 1 inch. Compared to traditional barrier curtains, which would be those yellow booms that you sometimes see people put out when they're trying to manage vegetation and high water exchange areas, the bubble curtain doesn't restrict navigation. So a lot of times you're managing plants in marinas or residential areas, and you'll have to shut down boat traffic through those areas with the bubble curtain. You can easily pass right over the bubbles that are being produced. It's very easy to deploy if you have proper equipment, and it can be left in place, and it's fairly durable. So if you have an area, we'll just say a marina, for example, that you're continually to manage multiple times a year or over the course of a number of years, you can leave the bubble tubing in place, and when you're ready to perform a management activity, you can go and hook up to it and start generating bubbles for your management. So just an overview of exactly what we did in that 2018, looking at the bubble curtain. We did 2 evaluations. One was with close bubble spacing, and the other one, we spaced the curtain a little bit further apart so we could sample some points in between those. As you see, the wind directions vary between the 2 evaluations, one of which we have pretty favorable wind, 0 to 5 blowing directly into the site. In the second evaluation, we had very unfavorable conditions with the wind 15 to 20 blowing directly out of the site into the main river. Also for the second evaluation, we incorporated a second compressor, kind of gave us a little bit higher airflow during the second evaluation to see how that may have impacted our dye retention. These are just a few visuals to show exactly what it looks like under operation, and the dye being placed out, and the size compressors that we utilize, and the type of setup that is needed for these type of studies. And just jumping into the results, we use this data to create a half-life. So based off that 10 ppb application, how long does it take for that concentration to reach half of the applied concentration within that plot? So if you look here at no bubble curtain, we achieved about 3.8 hours. In that particular scenario with a favorable wind, we would probably have pretty good control of flowering rush with a dicot application. And with the bubble curtain and a favorable wind, we almost doubled the half-life of the dye to 7.6 hours. Even with an unfavorable wind in our second evaluation, we still almost doubled the half-life. So even in a worst case scenario, bubble curtain evaluation number 2 was still suitable for dicot, but it also extended that half-life to the point where you can get in the ballpark to possibly do an end-of-thaw application for flowering rush, which that's another important thing. Instead of limiting yourself to just a single control method, by extending the contact time or extending the half-life of the dye within the plot, gives you a pretty good idea of maybe you can start using other tools instead of just sticking with one, being very limited to one particular herbicide. We were also doing water exchange evaluations in other parts of the river. One of those sites in particular was the Port Pasco Osprey Point site in 2018. This was with no bubble curtain in place or anything like that. We got a half-life of about 1 hour and 20 minutes. The three graphs on the left present a snapshot of the dye dissipation through the water column. Red indicates concentration at or above the target concentration of 10 parts per billion, and blue indicates concentrations at or below. So, about 30 minutes after treatment, you can kind of see minute amounts of dye being detected at the upstream end, and higher concentrations at the downstream end. And about 2.5 hours after treatment, the majority of the dye readings are less than 1 part per billion, with the exception of a few sampling points on the far downstream end. So just by looking at this and these results, you would likely assume that herbicide efficacy is going to be greater on the downstream portion of the plot, as these plants are going to receive an extended exposure time relative to those occurring on the upstream portion of the plot. So fast forward to 2019 from 2018, we got the proper permitting to do an actual herbicide application, and we chose the Port Pasco Osprey Point site. The reason for choosing the site is we had the data from 2018, so we had a pretty good understanding of what the water exchange was like in this area. Very easy access for putting out the bubble tubing, and it had a large stand of flowering rush present. So we did rhodamine dye plus herbicide treatment using Dicot Reward, and we applied that on July 30th, 2019, around 0400 hours. Very early in the morning, we were targeting a specific timing window. If you can see here in this graph, the discharge from McNary Dam, you see these little dips. These typically occur during the nighttime hours when most people are not generating electricity. So we were trying to really schedule that treatment during one of these low flow periods before everyone started waking up, getting ready to go to work and turning on lights, generating power. As you can see how dam discharge really starts to ramp up around that 7 a.m., 6:30, 7 a.m. Period. But in that treatment window, discharge averaged about 149,000 cubic feet per second. So just based off the dye data in that site, we had a half-life of about 1.8 hours, which is a little bit longer than what we saw in 2018. The graphs on the right just kind of give a visual representation of the movement of the dye within the plot. You see pretty good retention in the middle of the plot at 0 hours after treatment. Starts to move downstream, similar to those images I showed of the 2018 work. And then by 3 hours after treatment, you still have several areas around the 4 and 5 ppb range, but you also have a number of areas, particularly on that upstream end, that are around the 1 to 2 ppb range. Also, I should note that in 2018, we were demonstrating on a larger plot. It was actually 7.5 acres. In 2019, we shrunk the size of the plot to meet accommodations with the amount of bubble tubing material we had. We did have a double bubble tubing arrangement around this plot when this trial was ongoing. And we had a limited amount of material, and with the size compressors we had in the permitting requirements, we reduced that site to 4.5 acres. So just some of the results from our treatment. We could see flowering rush injury in as little as 2 days after treatment, and we did vegetation surveys 4, 8, 10, and 52 weeks after treatment. I'm going to show some images from the 4-week after treatment, and then kind of go into the 52-week after treatment surveys. So you can see prior to treatment there, and at 4 weeks after treatment, have some pretty good herbicide injury symptomology there within the site. So it looked like we got pretty good control, or we're going to get pretty good control just based off visual estimates. Injury symptoms very apparent that Dicot was applied. It works very quickly, leads to necrotic visual injury. And then looking at 52 weeks after treatment, you can see I included a photo here of what it looked like in 2019 and just prior to treatment in 2020. Same bush right there in those two images. There was very minimal emergent plants that were occurring throughout the site, which was very good to see. However, flowering rush percent occurrence was still about 90%. So we did do a follow-up treatment. So we did use the same methodology in 2020 with the dye mixed in with the Dicot application, so we get a good idea of half-life during that treatment as well. This was done a little later in the morning at 6:30 in the morning, and dam discharge was considerably higher in 2020, about 185,000 cubic feet per second, and we didn't have the resources this year, given all the travel restrictions and things like that relative to COVID, so we were unable to include a bubble curtain this year as well. And our estimated dye half-life was about 30 minutes, so considerably faster than what we saw in 2019. Like I mentioned, dam discharge was about 35,000 to 40,000 cubic feet per second greater than 2019 no bubble curtain. And there's really a lack of emergent flowering rush biomass within the plot, which could have led to less diet retention and faster water exchange throughout that plot. So once I started looking at these results and seeing that we had about a 30-minute half-life, I was kind of wondering, dicot works relatively quickly. It can be really limited by turbidity in the water because it can bind to suspended sediments pretty quickly and become unusable for plant uptake. But given the Columbia River is relatively, especially compared to Mississippi, it's gin clear water, turbidity NTU less than 1, I really felt that, dicot may be able to still provide control even under such a fast water exchange conditions. So 4 weeks after the second treatment, we also saw some good injury there. You can see these pictures relative to some of the pictures I showed from 2018 and 2019, considerably less emergent flowering rush in the plot. We're able to get some good injury to the plants within that plot in 2020, even under the really rapid water exchange. Just to show this graph here, flowering rush frequency of occurrence did decrease following the 2019 treatment by about 40%. Then you see the slight increase for the next year back to 90%, but we're seeing that same trend that we saw in 2019 and 2020 with a decrease of occurrence. And also in 2019, 4 weeks after treatment, a decline of native vegetation in the plot. Not by much, but this is typically pretty common whenever you're using a contact herbicide to control a target species. You do have some injuries to co-occurring native species, but once you start to decrease the occurrence of the invasive species, you can see a real resurgence of those native species, and that's exactly what we've seen here. So they increased actually to a little above what we saw pre-treatment in 2019. There's some future research. Really want to look at linking reservoir operations with water exchange evaluations, doing more dye studies during low dam generation periods, either early morning or nighttime with and without bubble tubing to see how that can really impact water exchange. And do a series of herbicide efficacy field verification studies. So far, we've only been able to focus in on this one plot, and we'd like to expand to multiple locations within McNary Reservoir. Same type of pre and post-treatment vegetation assessments and 2-year post-treatment vegetation assessments. So most of the flowering rush work that's been conducted, it's no surprise that it takes multiple years of management before you can really wear that rhizome base out, where you start to see some real noticeable results. So even in these fast water exchange scenarios with dicot, by timing your application appropriately, once flowering rush shoots reach the water surface and you can go in there and burn those shoots back, it really limits the amount of energy it can transport to its rhizomes, start producing rhizome buds and things like that. So if you get a good burn down treatment there, it has to use a lot of that starch and carbohydrate stored in that rhizome to produce new shoots before it can start producing buds or anything like that. So that's kind of the methodology used here with using contact herbicides to get long-term selective control of flowering rush. We have been unable to get any rhizome sampling or core sampling within this area. I have to imagine it'd be pretty difficult because it is a gravel river type bottom. Any core sampling for flowering rush in the past, it's been very difficult using a core when it's pretty gravel bottom, but we have gone to this site to try and collect rhizomes, no specific locations, but it doesn't seem like the rhizome base there is super established. We actually had quite a bit of difficulty collecting rhizomes with a Ponar dredge at the site. So really interested to see what type of results we're going to get. 2 years with two years of annual treatments at this site, and really just want to thank everybody that participated in the study. It took a lot of work over a number of years. Really a special thanks to Damian Walter and Brad Trumbo at the Walla Walla District. This year presented some very challenging circumstances, being unable to travel up to the site, and they were able to assist and did an awesome job with doing field sampling this summer. The Walla Walla District Pasco office, they've always been a huge help with the bubble tubing and being there for any mechanical and needs we need in regards to that. Machinery, John Madison and John Muscella, USDA, ARS, UC Davis, Steve Hoyle, NC State University, Canadian Pond for providing the bubble tubing, Terry McNabb and Aquatechnics, were huge support for dye and herbicide application. A number of other USACE employees at various districts, the Omaha District, Fort Peck office, Patricia Gilbert, and Rebecca Palka, I think that's right. But yeah, so a big team effort here, and really appreciate that assistance. And contact information here if anyone has any questions. I'll be glad to answer those.
Thank you, Bradley. That was great. Appreciate you sharing that information. Oh wait, I may have a question in the chat. Hold on a moment here. Although I guess to keep us on, I think what I'll do is we'll do our final talk, and then we may hold this. I see one question here in the chat that might take a few minutes. I'm gonna flip here to our last presentation is combined with Jen Parsons and Danielle Levin. And Jen, you should have control. And I believe you need to unmute, Jen.
Sorry. Can you
there
see?
You go. Nope. Yep.
Can you see my screen?
I cannot see your screen. I mean, I can see you.
Yeah. I clicked it again. Let me.
There you go. I see it now.
You can see it now?
Yep.
Okay, great. So hopefully that's at the start now. I'm going to be talking, or Danielle and I are sharing a presentation on Lake Roosevelt and the flowering rush response there. And Danielle is with the Colville tribes, and so I'm going to do the first part of the presentation, and then she's going to take it from there. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history and background, and she will talk about what was done this year. So Lake Roosevelt, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, is a large reservoir along the main stem of the Columbia River behind Grand Coulee Dam. It's in north central Washington state. This is the main stem of the Columbia that comes down from Canada up here, and then the Spokane River joins the reservoir right down here at the southern end. And I'm going to be mentioning Seven Bays in a little bit, so you can make a note that it's down here at the south end, just below where the Spokane flows in. And it is a challenging reservoir for many reasons. It's huge. It's got over 600 miles of shoreline, according to this data. And it's also managed by a 5-party agreement. So that it's managed together with all of these different entities, including the Colville tribes and the Spokane tribe. Both of those tribes have large sections of land along the river, along the reservoir. And then the National Park Service manages those sections of the reservoir that aren't managed by the tribes as a national recreation area. And then there's the Bureau of Reclamation that manages the dam and the water level. And then the Bureau of Indian Affairs is also involved. The reservoir is managed for flood control to some degree, at least, because they drop the water level in the winter time so that the water's low in the spring and early summer and winter time. So that will play a factor in our control plans. So it was discovered in Lake Roosevelt in August of 2019, just last year, by Larry Hudson, who works for the Okanagan County Noxious Weed Control Board. And Larry was out on a recreational fishing trip, and he launched there at the Seven Bays Marina and went across the river to the other side, to the west side, and looked over the side of the boat and saw a plant that looked a lot like flowering rush. And so he notified those of us who do this kind of work, and we went out and verified it pretty quickly on August 19th that it was indeed flowering rush. And And that area is located just below the confluence of the Spokane River. And if you remember from my earlier presentation, there's a large population of flowering rush in the Spokane. And so we were thinking that that was probably the source of this population. So additional surveys were done that last summer. We kind of cobbled together as many people who had time to get out and take sections of the reservoir shoreline. And this included people from Okanagan County Noxious Weeds. Again, Larry did some more survey work, the Colville Tribes and Spokane Tribe, and the National Park Service, and myself at the Department of Ecology. And so these are the areas that we surveyed last year. The green lines are the survey lines, and then the pink dots are areas where flowering rush was found. And you can see that it's mostly along, or it's all the plants we found were along the north shore here on the main stem of the Columbia, and then also on the north shore of the Spokane River arm. And so because we found these plants at the lower end of the Spokane River arm, we felt pretty sure that this population was coming out of the Spokane River rather than down from the Panda Ray River farther up the Columbia. So just to further illustrate the situation, that I mentioned that a large section of the reservoir is managed by the tribes. And so the Colville Reservation is this green hatched area on the north shore and west shore of the Columbia. And then the Spokane River, or the Spokane Reservation, is on the north side of the Spokane River arm and parts of the east shore of the Columbia. And you can see that all the flowering rush was found on the tribal land. Oddly, I would totally expect it to turn up on the non-tribal properties eventually, but we hadn't seen it there as of last year. So in last winter, we had several meetings with groups of interested people. There were a lot of people that were really interested in this find because it's such a huge reservoir, and getting flowering rush established in such a large system would be very problematic for habitat within the reservoir itself, because it provides such great habitat for piscivorous fish, and it would also just provide a huge source of propagules on downstream into the lower parts of the Columbia River, where salmon recovery is just an enormous priority for the state and federal government. And flowering rush, of course, will impact habitat for salmon in a huge way. So a lot of people came together to have meetings in last winter, and we came up with a plan to do some treatment because all of the populations were found on tribal land. Permits for treatment needed to happen through the tribes rather than the state. And the tribes sometimes sometimes their permits trigger federal permits, especially for herbicide use. And so we had to check into that as well. But on the Colville tribal lands anyway, they got their permits through in the wintertime really quickly. That was a great response. Our plan was to do bare ground herbicide treatment using imazapyr. Because this has been found to be successful up in Montana and Idaho, as Virgil explained earlier today. So that was the plan. As I mentioned, the reservoir is managed for flood control partly, and so it drops 50 feet or more in the wintertime and spring. So we had a window of opportunity to treat it while the plants were starting to grow in the spring, and yet before the water level came up. So we were targeting late April or early May for our treatment window. And we were going to use a coalition of state people, Department of Fish and Wildlife, Department of Natural Resources, Ecology, Department of Ag. We're all going to donate time and materials to try and get this rapid response up and going. And the tribes were really involved, as well as some federal partners. And then also as part of this, in the spring, we are planning to put out some monitoring plots to just try and keep track of how effective the treatment was going to be. And in the summer, we were hoping to do more survey of the rest of the reservoir and maybe cover some isolated patches if we could have gotten that added to the permit. But then, of course, COVID came along and everything just came to a screeching halt. We weren't able to do any of the treatments that we had planned with all the travel restrictions and everything. And Lake Roosevelt is really pretty remote. And so no one could get out there to do any of the treatments in the window that we had, since it was pretty early during the pandemic that we were planning to treat. And so anyway, all of this came to a screeching halt, but the Colville tribe did manage to get some work done. And so Danielle is going to take it from here and talk about that.
All right, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Jen, for that introduction. So I'm Danielle Blevins with the Colville Tribes, and I was just going to spend some time talking with you about what we accomplished in 2020 with our flowering rush. So as Jen spoke about, a lot of our plans didn't really happen due to the pandemic, but we were able to get some of those monitoring transects done in early May. And these were established in the large known patch that Jen spoke about across from 7 Bays. So next slide. So the transects we established, Jen helped remotely since she wasn't able to be there with COVID. But we set up 100-foot transects with Daubenmeier frames. They're 10 by 20 inches. We set those up every 10 feet and counted the number of emerged plants and the number of leaves per plant. So we initially had planned on digging and removing the plants for survey, but there were a lot of concerns with the history and archaeology program with digging and removing soil. So we opted to do the monitoring of above ground material. And so this year we hired a contractor with some grant monies that we received from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So they surveyed from the Grand Coulee Dam all the way north to Barnaby Island, which is north of Inchelium. And they also surveyed the Sampo River arm, which is that middle piece there that goes up to Keller. So the contractor is finalizing their report. So we still don't have all of the data, but we're anticipating that at the end of this month. But we did get a sneak peek of the survey plots, and that's what you can see here. Most of the points were discovered across from 7 Bays there, and then downriver there was quite a few smaller populations that they also found. Next slide. So here's just some pictures from the survey work that they conducted this year. Most of the work was done from boat and by foot to reach difficult areas. And they also utilized rakes periodically in addition to their visual observations. And all the plant material from the rake toss, they, of course, threw away in garbage bags on board their boats. And then that bottom picture on the left is just this illustration of one of the larger patches that they were seeing with the survey. The next slide. All right, so as you can see, it can be really challenging to find flowering rush. As you can see on that picture on the right, you have to actually, it could be a sedge species, so a native species. You actually have to get out on the boat and walk the shoreline to ensure you're actually looking at flowering rush. And then those pictures on the left are just some more illustrations of the larger populations that they were seeing. All right, next slide. All right, so that picture on top is just an illustration of a single plant. So as you can see, it can be really difficult to find just one plant in the water when it's completely submerged. So we're working with a researcher to see if we can utilize drone technology to detect plants during drawdown. And then we can prioritize treatment locations from that data that we collect by a drone. We took that picture there on the bottom right when we're doing our survey. And as you can see the plants really well early in the spring during drawdown. Okay, next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, we're still waiting for the final report, but some initial observations and notes that we've gotten from the contractor were that cows seem to like flowering rush. So in some of those areas where they have access to the shoreline, they were hitting it really hard. It was also noted that the flowering rush was found in higher boat traffic areas, which could also be because some of these areas have that ideal substrate for both flowering rush as well as beach access for the boaters. And then lastly, a final note that we had from the survey is that it appears that, like Jen had mentioned, this population is coming from the Spokane River, because we were only detecting one small population about 1.5 miles north of that 7 Bays population. So it's pretty likely that it's coming from the Spokane River and not Panda Ray. And I think that's it, Jen. There's our contact information.
Great, thanks Danielle and Jen. If you have any questions for on this project, you can put those into the question box at this time. I don't see anything yet. I'm going to try to go back through here. We have a few minutes before we were to adjourn here at the top of the hour, and I wanted to try to see if we could address some of those pieces. So I haven't forgotten about you. I'm going to do my best here. So I did have a comment that popped up after John Gaskin, you had presented, and it was more of a comment in that that the genotype 6 that was on the spot on the map in Saskatchewan, apparently that spot has recently been eradicated. Not sure if you want to make a comment, but that was a comment made about that particular spot. I don't know. Do you have? Yeah, good stuff, right?
Yeah, good to know that that has been eradicated. Appreciate that. I'll put it into my notes on that.
Okay.
Good deal. Glad we don't have that unique genotype anymore then. Good work.
And that was from Chet Neufeld, if that's of help to you. That was the individual.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see, and then looking back here, I see that, so Virgil Dupuis asked, and I'm guessing this is directed towards Damien or Stephen, this reoccurring this issue here on the non-federal cost share related to WRDA. That requirement makes it difficult for tribes, and I think many others, to participate. Is there any chance of influencing that non-federal cost share? So Damien or Stephen, I don't know if you have a comment or. And that's okay if you don't. Oh, Damien, go ahead if you'd like.
Yeah, Leah, so I'm trying to see the question, I guess, in the chat box, because tribes can participate through with the states, PSME. So I guess, are they referring to like commercial industrial?
Well, the exact words are the non-federal cost share requirements make it difficult for tribes to participate.
Okay, so tribes can participate. So the non-federal, the only thing I'm thinking is we don't do it like with a commercial company. So like, you know, there's been talks like with Vista's work and stuff like that. And especially if they're already committed under like, say, like a mitigation requirement by the state or something. So maybe whoever that is, have them reach out. Maybe they can explain the question a little more to me. If you give them my email or something, we can I can touch base and help answer that, or find out and get a better answer if I don't know it.
Great. Thank you. I guess, let's see, Bradley, do you want to verbalize the question that, or I guess I could verbalize the question that came through related to your talk, and then maybe you want to, just for the edification of the group. So Becky had asked, when using the bubble curtain, did you measure change in dissolved O2 levels? Over time, have you observed increase in plant growth or changes in fish population or usage in the area as a result of the O2 increases from the bubble curtain?
Yeah, so from this question, I guess I should have clarified a little more clearly in the presentation that the bubble curtain is really only operational for a number of hours. Typically with these contact herbicides, exposure time variance between, say, 3 hours and 6 hours can greatly influence how successful your control is. So using the bubble tubing and bubble curtain for, say, a systemic product that requires an extended contact time, like upwards of 30 to 60 days, the bubble tubing probably would not be your best method there, because they are run from diesel air compressors. Anyone familiar with diesel engines knows it's really bad to run diesel out of a diesel engine, so you're constantly having to add fuel to those to keep those in power. But as far as your question, noticing any DO level changes over time, we have not seen anything relative to the dissolved oxygen levels increasing substantially. I think the longest we've had the bubble tubing running, it's only been about 8 hours, maybe 10 hours. We have noticed, fish assembling on the outer edge of the bubble tubing, mostly small type bait fish and things like that. And I think there's been a lot of interest using these bubble curtains to prevent fish from entering certain areas. I think there's been some research looking at them for Asian carp prevention and things like that. So another use for bubble tubing could be the prevention of fish from entering the treated area as well. So I haven't seen any fish pass through the bubble curtain, just assemble on the outside of them. But as far as increased DO levels and increased plant growth or anything like that, we have not documented any changes in sites like that. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Bradley. Let's see, I have one more. It's kind of a broad comment, and I'm not sure. I will lob it out here. It was from earlier this morning that came up, probably from during the state and provincial updates. So this is from Angie Kimpo, saying that she's down in the Portland area. So is there any hope of containing the species? Are there any observed environmental limitations of the species, or is it just destined to travel down the Columbia to make its way here? And I think that's sort of a broad comment, and I would welcome any of our presenters to comment on that. I would hope at least one of you could, please.
Actually, that brings up a pretty good question. I've kind of been thinking about, and me and Dr. Harms have discussed too, are the salinity tolerances of flowering rush. So is it possible for it to make it all the way down the Columbia River to the Pacific Ocean and become established in some of those bays where, salinity may be a factor? That's something that's yet to be looked at, but we've kind of thrown around the idea of possibly doing some research looking at that to see, there could be an impact of it establishing. We've already seen that it can establish in some very unique areas. It seems to not have very many limitations. It can grow as deep as light penetrates, and even grow on areas where there's no water present or even inches of water. So, and tides, I don't know if, water fluctuation seems to actually increase how well it can thrive. So that's just another thing we've been kind of thinking about if it were to get that far down the river.
Thanks for that. Do any of our other speakers want to comment on that broad question?
I could just say that we would fully expect it to thrive in the Portland area. It's far enough up from the Columbia or from the ocean that it's going to be pretty fresh water, and there's a lot of habitat in that area. So that's why we're really trying to hold the line at about McNary Dam if we can. We're really trying to get those populations reduced that are downstream of there, and hope that some of this work the Corps is doing farther upstream and biocontrol agents maybe coming online can help us keep it from becoming a real problem farther downriver.
Thank you, Jen. Great. Well, I believe we have addressed all of our questions from our audience. So I guess with that, we are 5 minutes before the hour. So I really just want to thank all of our speakers for sharing both their, their studies and the monitoring results, et cetera. I really appreciate you putting the time in today and sharing with everybody. And I guess also too, Jen had mentioned first thing this morning, if you're interested in being more involved with the CWMA, we're glad to have you on this webinar, but there are other opportunities if you'd like to be part of the steering committee. So stay tuned for that. We will broadcast information via the listserv about an upcoming meeting in December. It won't be of this webinar format, but more of probably a phone call. But yes, please feel free to follow us through the listserv, and if you want to join that, you can reach out to me. And then also, or you could, contact us through the website as well, which is columbiabasincwma.org. So with that, again, thank you all for joining us. I hope everybody stays healthy and has a wonderful rest of your day. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leah.
Yeah, thank you, Leah. Thanks for all your help.
Great job. You too, Jen.
You too.
Thanks all. Take care.
Okay.